Chapter 60. These two are pale masters of the Yutsang sect. Naturally, they can stay in the upper garden. The courier's expression didn't change as he spoke slowly. He had been a guard here for a long time and had seen all kinds of people. Naturally, he wouldn't be frightened by a few words from the other. Yutsang sect. The young cultivator's expression changed slightly. Then, he saw that there were only two people in Zhang Yan's group. When he heard the word, pill master, his expression relaxed. His tone became tough again and he sneered, so what if it's the Yutsang sect? Don't tell me they don't care about first come, first served. He stood in front of Zhang Yan and raised the magic sword in his hand. He said, we don't have a place to stay yet. How about we have a sword duel? If you lose, you'll give this garden to me. How about it? The courier looked on coldly from the side and didn't say anything to stop them. This person's cultivation was probably in the opening meridian realm and hadn't entered the first tier of the clear chi realm. The magic sword in his hand still had some spiritual light. However, Zhang Yan didn't even look at him. He only ordered the courier to take the token and quickly lead the way. The courier didn't dare to disobey. He took the token and led the way. Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and also walked out. You! The young cultivator was angered by the way Zhang Yan looked at him as if he didn't exist. His face flushed red and his whole body trembled. Seeing that Zhang Yan was about to step out of the gate of the courier house, he shouted, "Rise!" The magic sword in his hand flew out of its sheath with a clang and slashed at Zhang Yan's back. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed, and he turned his head. He rubbed his lips and blew out a turbid chi. This turbid chi was once again mixed with a heavy baleful aura, and it went to meet the flying sword. However, a chi la sound was heard, and the flying sword's spiritual energy was almost depleted. The sword fell down, but the turbid chi's momentum didn't decrease, and it continued to rush forward. The chi hadn't arrived yet, but the young man's complexion couldn't help but change. Right at this moment, someone shouted, "Fellow Taoist, please show mercy." A flying talisman flew out of nowhere and released a ray of light in the air in an attempt to block this turbid chi. Who would have thought that the turbid chi would easily pierce through it with a pu sound? That person exclaimed in surprise. A silver ring in the shape of a full moon flew out from his hand and directly collided with the turbid chi. This silver ring was brimming with spiritual energy and was dazzling. With a single glance, one could tell that it was a magic treasure. Zhang Yan frowned. He took a deep breath and withdrew the foul air back into his chest. In the blink of an eye, he saw a gorgeous woman standing with a sword in her hand. With a wave of her hand, the silver ring returned to her wrist. This woman looked flirtatious, but her expression was cold. With one look, one could tell that she was from the profound sect. She was probably at the first level of the bright chi realm, a genuine human cultivator. However, when she saw Zhang Yan, her expression changed, and she said, "Zhang Yan, it's actually you." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and said, "Fellow Taoist, have we met before?" The woman sneered twice and said, "Of course you don't remember me. Below the sweeping cloud peak, do you remember senior brother Shinjingyue?" Zhang Yan's gaze focused, and he looked at her again. He nodded and said, "So it's a fellow Taoist from the Southern Flower sect. I wonder how senior brother Shin is doing." The young cultivator was so scared that his face had turned pale. At this moment, he forced himself to speak, "Senior sister Jiang, you know each other?" The woman said coldly, "Thanks to fellow Taoist, senior brother Shin passed away half a year ago." Zhang Yan's expression didn't change. That day, when Shin Jingyue forcefully deduced the eroding runes, it was obvious that he had exhausted all of his efforts. This ending was not unexpected, but he didn't have any ill feelings towards this person. The woman took a few steps forward and blocked in front of the young cultivator. She said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, today my junior brother did something wrong and offended you. I will bring him back to punish him. Senior brother Zhang, can you give me some face?" Zhang Yan faintly smiled and said, "This is the territory of the Water Nation. I naturally won't make things difficult for you. The woman let out a sigh of relief, but who knew that Zhang Yan would turn around and say to the courier officer, I heard that after country King Ji established the water nation, you established rules, etiquette, and laws. As a result, the cultivators of the world didn't view you as a wild race. After seeing you today, I can't help but feel disappointed. When I see you in the future, I will ask you where the laws are and where the rules are. After saying that, he didn't look at the two of them and turned around to leave with Luo Xiao. The courier officer and the woman's expressions changed at the same time. The courier officer walked in front of the woman with a cold expression and said, Fellow Taoist Jiang, please give me an explanation for this matter. Zhang Yan's simple words forced the courier officer to step out and deal with this matter. What was originally a very small matter had now become out of hand. The woman instantly became extremely angry, but there was nothing she could do. The young cultivator also seemed to realize that he had caused some trouble. He said, Senior sister, I will take responsibility for my own actions. The woman stopped him and took a deep breath. She comforted him, Junior brother, don't worry. Senior brother Shen and the Lian family of the Water Nation are old friends. Perhaps this matter isn't as bad as you think. Wait until you see senior brother. She stared at the back of Zhang Yan's departing figure and frowned. She bit her lower lip and thought, I heard that Zhang Yan wasn't even a lower house disciple before, but from his foul breath, he is clearly at the second tier of the clear qi realm. He is probably not far from the third tier. I thought that with the help of Master Yu Huan, entering the first tier of the clear qi realm within half a year was already extremely fast. I didn't think that this Zhang Yan would be even faster than me. Could it be that he really is a genius? I don't know how long I'll have to wait to avenge senior brother Shen. Just as Zhang Yan stepped out of the gate of the courier station, he saw a cultivator walk in from outside. The two of them made eye contact and nodded at each other. That person only paused for a moment on Zhang Yan but glanced at Luo Xiao a few more times before passing by. What is this person's cultivation? Zhang Yan asked in a deep voice. He could faintly see that this person's appearance was somewhat similar to Shen Jingyue's. Furthermore, this person's attire was exactly the same as the two Nanhua sect disciples from before. He was definitely a disciple of Nanhua sect, but he was unable to see through this person's cultivation. This person's cultivation is similar to mine, we're both at the second tier. After Luo Xiao used the Shell King True Dew to recover, her cultivation that she hadn't broken through for a long time had increased once again. She was now a cultivator at the second tier of the Profound Light Realm, bright night like day. She looked back at that person and asked, Lang Jun, is there something wrong with this person? Zhang Yan shook his head lightly and thought to himself, listening to the words of that woman just now, Shen Jingyue is already dead. This person seems to be somewhat related to Shen Jingyue. If we meet again in the future, there might be another dispute. I need to quickly raise my cultivation. As for that young cultivator, he didn't care about him at all. He just needed to borrow the water country to deal with him. As for how to deal with him, he was too lazy to ask. The Baiyun Pavilion was located at the east of the southern palace. It was an independent island in the center of the lake. There was a pavilion that was half submerged in the lake. At night, the shadows of the trees danced and the moon shone brightly in the sky. The beach was covered in frost and the water reflected in the distance. After the courier brought Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao here, he gave them a restriction talisman and left. Zhang Yan took 2 steps on the island and felt the sound coming from under his feet. He thought, this place is cold and full of water. It's suitable for me to condense the serene in heavy water. According to the Lan Yun secret book, after reaching the second level of clear qi, one could condense the serene in heavy water with 16 mouthfuls of clear qi. 1 drop of the serene in heavy water had the power of 1,000 caddies and was difficult to block. If it was 10 drops, there would be few opponents among the same generation. If it was 100 drops, 1,000 soldiers would retreat. If it was 1,000 drops, it could reverse the flow of waterfalls and change the course of rivers. However, there was a shortcoming in practicing this method. It required 16 mouthfuls of clear qi to stay in one's chest at all times. Every day, one had to absorb the serene yin qi from the depths of the cold water. After 108 days, one could condense one drop. Moreover, one could not use it against an enemy when refining it. Otherwise, all previous efforts would be wasted. Moreover, after the 16 mouthfuls of clear qi were condensed into the serene yin heavy water, the lost clear qi would need to be cultivated again. In this way, the time needed to break through to the third level of clear qi would be delayed. In fact, the Lan Yun secret book walked the Tao of Dharma. It paid particular attention to the transformation and condensation of spiritual qi. Naturally, it did not pay special attention to the speed of cultivation. However, if it walked the Tao of qi, such as the Taibai Golden Book, it would always focus on honing Xian qi. Other than that, there was nothing else. However, in Zhang Yan's mind, even though he had a lot of magic treasures, he would never complain about having more methods to fight against an enemy. There was still 9 months until the elixir gathering. If he could break through to the third level of clear qi in half a year, he would have 81 mouthfuls of spiritual qi in his body. When he practiced the serene yin heavy water, he would have less to worry about. After making up his mind, Zhang Yan looked at Luo Xiao and said, "In these 3 months, I will be cultivating in seclusion. Unless King Ji summons me, I will not see any visitors." Luo Xiao nodded and said, "Lang Jun, don't worry. I will be waiting outside. Don't worry and cultivate." Zhang Yan walked into the water pavilion and waved his talisman. The restriction of the Baiyun pavilion was opened and the formation was activated. Without the owner's permission, even a core formation cultivator would not be able to enter. Sitting cross-legged in the quiet room, Zhang Yan was not in a hurry to cultivate. Instead, he took out the 3 longevity pills from his sleeve. After looking at them for a moment, he threw one of them into his mouth. As soon as it entered his abdomen, it was enveloped by spiritual qi, preventing the poison from acting up. Then, he silently circulated his Xian qi to refine it. Afterwards, he stored the accumulated Dan qi into the open qi opening in his chest. After he finished refining the first pill, he swallowed the second pill into his stomach and repeated the same trick. After he had refined the 2 yin-yang pill poisons, he took out a flying sword that was filled with spiritual qi from his qiankuan sleeve. He looked at it carefully, opened his mouth, and spat out a mouthful of murky qi on it. With a sizzling sound, as if a bucket of dye had been poured into clear water, the spiritual qi on the flying sword was quickly stained. In an instant, it became an ordinary sword. Even the body of the sword was corroded and mottled marks could be seen. Zhang Yan nodded in satisfaction. His idea was indeed feasible. Using the condensed murky qi to wrap around the heavy fiend qi could indeed stain the flying sword, but the effect seemed to be somewhat insufficient. For example, when he was fighting against Wu Zhen, even if the opponent's flying sword was slightly stained by the heavy fiend qi, he could still control the flying sword to injure him. However, if the yin-yang poison was mixed in, then the effect would obviously increase by a few levels. And now, as long as the opponent had not condensed the profound light seed and the flying sword came over, he would spit out a mouthful of air. That would destroy the spirit and contaminate the qi. Even if he were to face such a method, he would not be able to block it even without his talisman. Chapter 61. After the closed-door training, Zhang Yan would condense the clear and turbid air in the middle of the night, when the sun was rising, and combine them into one. With the help of the moon-seizing jade amulet, his progress was extremely fast. In addition, he took out 2 hours every day to refine the fate-determining jade amulet. Every time this jade was refined, it could withstand 3 attacks from a transcendent artifact. In Zhang Yan's opinion, it was more valuable than a normal transcendent artifact. As for the rest of the time, he used it to practice the internal orifice technique. Once he mastered this technique, he would be able to identify many medicinal properties even without the broken jade. Not only that, even if the spiritual roots of the immortal herbs were deep underground, he would be able to identify them as long as he passed by. It was the most useful technique. He thought to himself that if one day he was no longer in the Yingzang sect, he would be able to use this technique to refine elixirs and medicines without the help of others. After cultivating like this for about 100 days, he had merged the 75 breaths of clear and turbid qi into one. In addition to the ones he had refined earlier, he now had 78 breaths of spiritual qi in his body. He only needed to refine 3 more to break through. He reached the 3rd level of the clear qi stage in one breath. Just as he was about to continue, he heard the sound of a golden bell outside. He retreated from his meditation. He opened the door of the quiet room and walked outside. Luo Xiao, who was waiting in the corridor, came up and said, King Ji's youngest son, Prince Zhen, Ji Zhang, has sent an envoy. He is waiting outside the Baiyun pavilion. Oh. Zhang Yan didn't expect that Ji Zhang would actually come looking for him. He couldn't help but be slightly surprised. Everyone knew that Ji Zhoshang, the king of the Water Nation, had the intention to abolish the East Palace and make Prince Xin the crown prince. If nothing went wrong, he would definitely be the next king. Moreover, he was the protagonist of this elixir gathering. He could not afford to offend him and left him outside. Luo Xiao obviously knew the importance of the matter, so she specially reported to him. He gave her a look of approval and took out a talisman to dispel the restriction on the island. On the surface of the lake, more than 50 people were standing on a huge lotus leaf. The person in front was wearing the court uniform of the Water Nation of the Dang region. Her face was like a peach blossom and her figure was graceful. It was a female official. Zhang Yan's expression changed. The sect leader of the Yucang faction liked to use female cultivators, and this Ji Zhoshang also liked to use female officials. This caused the entire Shui nation to follow suit, and it seemed like this King Zhen was no exception. Seeing that the prohibition had been opened, the female official and her group stepped onto the island. Behind her were 4 female servants who were carrying a tray. As they approached the island, she first glanced at Zhang Yan, then smiled sweetly and said, His Royal Highness King Zhen has decreed that Zhang Yan, the emissary of the Mingcang faction, is highly skilled in alchemy, so he has specially bestowed a dazzling luo robe. Her enunciation was clear, and her voice was loud but not muffled. It was a little hoarse, but it was very comfortable. She ordered someone to bring a dark purple Taoist robe to Zhang Yan, then said, This robe can ward off water and fire, block metal, gather qi and calm the mind. Please accept it, fellow Taoist Zhang. Zhang Yan waved his hand, indicating for Luo Xiao to accept it. Almost every alchemist who came here was rewarded by the Water Royal family, so he was not surprised. Following that, he had Luo Xiao offer over 100 spirit shells as a presentation according to the rules. Who knew that the female official would reject it with a smile? At first, Zhang Yan thought that she thought it was too little, but then he heard a female servant say, My master doesn't care for these spirit shells of yours. The female official's phoenix eyes turned, and she scolded her, saying, Don't be rude. Fellow Taoist Zhang is the direct descendant of Master Zhou, how can you be rude? The female official said in a low voice, Yes. Zhang Yan could tell that this female official seemed to have other matters to attend to, so he cupped his hands and said, May I know how to address you, senior official? The female official also cupped her hands in return, saying, Fellow Taoist Zhang need not be so courteous. I am Zhen Ming, and I don't deserve to be called senior official. You can just call me fellow Taoist. Since the other party didn't mention her position in the Water Royal family, Zhang Yan was happy to do so. He turned to the side and said, Fellow Taoist Zhen, please come into the pavilion for a chat. Zhen Ming, however, extended her lily-white hand and waved it lightly. She said, There's no need. I've come today for official business, and also for a private request. Zhang Yan smiled and said, I don't know when, please tell me, fellow Taoist. Zhen Ming sighed and said, This lowly official has a younger brother. A month ago, he was too aggressive in his cultivation of the mysterious technique, which resulted in the evil fire's backlash, causing his internal organs to be injured. He needs to be treated with the Imperial Lu pill. Although this pill is easy to refine, only the one with the most medicinal strength is useful just now. For the rest, there is no benefit in taking too many. I heard that Grandmaster Ren once highly praised fellow Taoist Zhang, praising him for his friendly ability to discern medicinal properties and understand pharmacology. As such, I have come to ask for fellow Taoist's assistance. Zhang Yan nodded. He understood the purpose of the other party's visit. It turned out that it was because Ren Kai wanted to spread his name. The Imperial Lu pill was extremely famous in the field of alchemy. It could calm one's inner fire, remove poisonous gas, and temper one's meridians. Those who practiced the path of strength would sometimes be too aggressive and would be attacked by the internal and external fire. This would cause their minds to become dull, their tempers to be irritable, and they would kill at the slightest provocation. It was extremely difficult to control. If it was not properly treated, it was very possible that they would lose their mind. However, he felt that it was a little strange. There were so many alchemists in Shui country. Could it be that none of them could discern medicinal properties? Why did they have to ask him for help? There must be some other reason behind this. Zhang Yan thought to himself, I heard that this Shen King loves alchemy and is practically obsessed with it. Could it be that she heard of my reputation and is using this as a pretext to test me? Thinking of this, his spirits rose, and he asked, where are the pills? Zhen Ming said, I've brought them with me. Wan, why haven't you presented them yet? Wan made a sound of acknowledgement and brought out the coiled crane copper cauldron in her hands. Luo Xiao stepped forward to receive it, but Wan suddenly pouted and said, once this cauldron is opened, it needs to be consumed within 2 hours. Don't brag about it because you don't have the ability. Otherwise, you'll waste this cauldron of pills and cause Second Lang to suffer for nothing. Zhang Yan's expression did not change, but he put down the hand he was about to extend. He stood there silently, not saying a word or moving. Zhen Ming's eyebrows rose, and her phoenix eyes shone with power. She said coldly, Wan, slap yourself 10 times. Wan was stunned, and an expression of grievance appeared on her face. However, she did not dare to resist. She raised her white palm and repeatedly slapped her own face. When she stopped, a sliver of blood seeped out of the corner of her mouth. Zhen Ming turned to look at Zhang Yan and said, my daughter has never been disciplined. I've made a fool of myself in front of you. Zhang Yan smiled slightly, and only then did he extend his hand to receive the medicine cauldron. He reached out to open the cauldron. As soon as the lid was opened, a wisp of white gas rose up, and a wave of fragrance rushed into his nostrils. He squinted his eyes, and after a moment, pointed at one of the pills and said, this is it. Zhen Ming looked at Zhang Yan with surprise, and instructed a female attendant beside her, take it and give it to Second Lang. Come back quickly. The female attendant did not dare to be negligent. She used a silk handkerchief that she had prepared to take the pills, and hurriedly returned to the lotus leaf in the lake. She could faintly see that there was still a youth who was trapped in the middle. His ankles and wrists were shackled, and when he saw that someone was feeding him pills, he began to struggle. Presumably, this person was Zhen Ming's younger brother. Zhang Yan did not think that she would actually bring him here. He did not want to look any longer, and since he had nothing to do, he stood where he was and began to chat with Zhen Ming. As they chatted, Zhen Ming was very surprised. This Zhang Yan had originally thought that he was only an alchemist, but he did not expect that this person was not only familiar with ancient records, but also knew all kinds of miscellaneous anecdotes. She did not feel bored talking to this person at all, and her interest in the topic was unconsciously aroused. After a few more words, the female attendant turned back and reported, after Second Lang took it, his mind was relaxed, and he has already fallen asleep. Zhen Ming's face revealed a joyful expression. Fellow Zhang is indeed an outstanding talent of the present age. Zhang Yan smiled faintly, and said, I wouldn't dare. I was just lucky. Zhen Ming muttered to herself for a moment, and looked at Zhang Yan. She said, with fellow Zhang's intelligence, you must have understood the monarch's intentions by coming to the alchemy gathering. Zhang Yan glanced at the other party, and nodded lightly. Zhenming seemed to heave a sigh of relief, and said, however, Prince Shen will naturally not let fellow Zhang suffer a loss. This time, he has agreed that the lustrous cloud shellfish field will henceforth belong to the Yutzang sect, and the 3 pools will not provoke him over this matter. In addition, fellow Zhang and Prince Shen can be considered to be fellow cultivators, so I wonder what fellow Zhang wants. His Royal Highness will do his best to satisfy you. This time, Ji Jiushang was using the alchemy gathering to create momentum for Prince Shen, Ji Zhang, so that everyone in the world would know that he was the next monarch. As for the Essence Metal Life Fruit book, it was a technique to cultivate strength. Anyone with a discerning eye could naturally see that the winner of this book could only be Ji Zhang. However, since it was the alchemy gathering, he could not go overboard. Others had come to support him, so he had to give them some benefits, right? Furthermore, he could also use his wealth to win over the hearts of fellow cultivators in the world. After this alchemy gathering, Prince Shen's position as crown prince would definitely be stable. Zhang Yan thought for a moment, then said in a deep voice, if it's possible, I would like to borrow the Essence Metal Life Fruit book to take a look. Zhenming did not think that Zhang Yan would make such a request. She was stunned at first, then said in shock, fellow Taoist, you are a human cultivator. Forgive me for being blunt, but reading this book is useless. Zhang Yan, however, shook his head and said, I'm not reading this book for cultivation. I'm just trying to resolve a doubt in my heart. However, I won't take it for free. My esteemed teacher has a bottle of medicinal pills called the Pill of Transformation. As long as one's cultivation reaches a certain level, as long as they consume this pill, they will definitely be able to transform and shed their shells. Oh. Zhenming's eyes brightened. In the Water Nation, even the direct descendants of the royal family might not be able to transform. It should be known that only after transforming could they cultivate profound techniques. This was similar to the opening of meridians for human cultivators. If this bottle of Pill of Transformation was really as Zhang Yan had said, then its value to the royal family was practically immeasurable. She hesitated for a moment, then said, I can't make the decision on this matter. I have to report this to Prince Shen. Zhang Yan nodded and said, that's how it should be. Zhenming seemed to be rather impatient. After saying a few more words, she hurriedly bid farewell and left. Zhang Yan, however, seemed to have thought of something. He first whispered a few words into Luo Zhao's ear, then stood there in a daze for a while before returning to the water pavilion to meditate. He originally thought that exchanging medicinal pills for books would drag on for at least 10 days or half a month, and at least 2 or 3 times. He did not think that Zhenming would come to visit again that very night. After leading her into the inner chamber, Zhenming took out a book made of gold and said seriously, Prince Shen found out about this medicinal pill and was unable to contain his joy. He urged me to quickly show this book to you. I hope that you can swear an oath that after reading this book, you will not reveal even half a sentence of this book to a second person. Zhang Yan looked at the book in his hand. He did not think that this book was already in Prince Shen's hands, yet he would so easily show it to him. Even he, at this moment, felt a sense of disbelief in his heart. No wonder people said that Prince Shen loved to do ridiculous things and treated medicinal pills as if they were his life. It seemed like he really did it on a whim and did not care about anything else. Judging from Zhenming's behavior, it seemed that this book was also secretly brought out. However, wasn't this a good thing for him? He immediately swore an oath. Zhenming's expression relaxed and she handed the book to Zhang Yan. She said, Friend, please finish reading this quickly. I need to bring this book back as soon as possible. Zhang Yan nodded and began to flip through the book. With his current memory, he could naturally memorize the content after reading it once. Not long after, he put down the book and took out a bottle of medicinal pills from his sleeve. He handed it to Zhenming. Prince Shen is an expert in this field. You can tell if it's real or fake with one look. Zhenming accepted the bottle and left happily. After the woman left the island, Zhang Yan stood by the railing of the water pavilion and looked at the vast expanse of mist in front of him. Friend Luo, has there been anything strange in the city recently? Luo Xiao replied, if fellow Daoist didn't mention it, I really wouldn't have paid attention to it. During the day, I investigated and found that other than the disciples of the various sects, there were quite a number of demons with high cultivation bases gathered in one place. Zhang Yan shook his head and sighed. Prince Shen is frivolous and does things according to his own will. He is not the type of person a ruler should be. I'm afraid that the matter of the elixir gathering has changed. He heard that the original crown prince of the water country had been in power for 100 years. Now that he had been abdicated, if he did not fight now, he would not have another chance in the future. Whether it was Ji Zhoshang's intention to use this opportunity to sweep away the Eastern Palace's forces or the Eastern Palace's unwillingness to fail and counterattack, this was not a place to stay for long. However, he had already achieved his goal. The water country might be in a civil war, and it was inconvenient to enter and exit the water country. If he did not leave now, he might not be able to leave again. Zhang Yan said in a low voice, a storm is brewing. Friend Luo, we should leave quickly. Chapter 62. Even though the Shui nation is in chaos, Lang Jun is the envoy of the Yutzang sect. Furthermore, there are disciples from the various sects who have come to congratulate you. Could it be that someone from the Shui nation would purposely come to make things difficult for Lang Jun? Luo Xiao felt a little strange. Even if the Shui nation was in chaos, it would not implicate Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan waved his hand and said, King Zhen is not secretive and can easily cause trouble. If he is safe and sound in the Elixir Association, it will be fine. But if he is forced to abdicate or even imprisoned, a small matter can become a big crime. For example, borrowing the golden book today. If it is exposed, it will be a big crime. If I don't leave now, will I just sit and wait to be involved? The Shui nation of the Dang region was unique. No matter how high one's cultivation level was, one could not fly. If chaos broke out, no matter who was in power, the 8 entrances and exits would be sealed to prevent important people from escaping. In this way, life and death would be in the hands of others. This was not what Zhang Yan wanted. Luo Xiao's expression turned serious and said, Lang Jun is right. I will prepare a boat. Zhang Yan stopped her and said, wait. Before you leave, go buy a batch of beautiful fish demons. I will bring them back to the island to decorate the scenery. He had been thinking about how to bring Luo Xiao into the sect. Now that he thought about it, wasn't coming to the Shui nation the best opportunity? If he bought a batch of female demons and brought them back to the sect, not only could he make friends with his fellow disciples, but he could also use them to hide Luo Xiao's identity and keep her by his side. Luo Xiao's beautiful eyes turned and she understood his intention, so she nodded and excused herself before walking out. Zhang Yan looked at the sparkling lake under the night sky and thought to himself, it's a pity that I only need 3 breaths of spiritual qi to break through the 3rd realm of Qi Ming. Now it seems that I have to go, but I can't waste the cold qi in this vein. He took a deep breath and absorbed the cold energy coming from the depths of the water into his qi orifice. He had 3 qi orifices. The first one was used to refine the 3 orifices technique, the second to store the evil qi and yin-yang poison, and the third to absorb the cold energy. The cold qi in this qi orifice should be enough to refine a drop of nether-yin heavy water. Once he returned to Yutzang sect, he would find another cold yin cave. An hour later, Jiang Yu pushed open the door and entered the water beauty garden on the west side of the South Kasha Palace. She saw her senior brother, Shen Yifeng, cleaning a flying sword. Although his eyes were as calm as usual, the sharp murderous intent in his eyes could not be concealed no matter what. His wrist was even trembling slightly. Jiang Yu stepped forward and asked with concern, Senior brother, what's wrong? Shen Yifeng replied without raising his head, the people I sent to keep an eye on Zhang Yan have reported back. They say that this person opened the Biyun Pavilion's prohibition spell after midnight today and is currently searching for boats. It seems that he intends to leave. Jiang Yu was shocked. Senior brother, you want to? Shen Yifeng calmly grabbed the cloth in his hand and immediately turned it to dust. This is a good opportunity. Zhang Yan is a disciple of the Yutzang sect. I don't know how long I will have to wait to avenge second brother. Now that the heavens have opened their eyes and granted me a good opportunity, how can I miss it? A hint of worry floated onto Jiang Yu's face and she said, but senior brother, in a few years it will be the sword competition between the 16 sections. Although I also want to avenge senior brother Shen, why rush it? Shen Yifeng shook his head firmly and said, you also saw that Zhang Yan's cultivation speed is godly. He is now at the threshold of the 3rd level of clear qi. The Yutzang sect is a large sect. If I wait a few more years, who knows what level his cultivation has reached. If I don't kill him now, it will be even harder to kill him in the future. Jiang Yu saw that she could not dissuade Shen Yifeng and reminded him in a small voice, senior brother, the female Xiao with Zhang Yan is also very powerful. Are you confident? Shen Yifeng snorted coldly and said, I have talismans in my hands and spiritual energy is endless. What is there to be afraid of? He stood up and waved his sleeves. With a series of chang-chang sounds, the 6 flying swords on the table all jumped up and were put into his sleeves. When the rooster crowed, Zhang Yan was ready to embark on his return journey. This time, Luo Xiao had purchased more than 100 fish demon beauties in one go. The 5 boats that he had hired were lined up on the wide surface of the water, cutting through the waves in the morning wind and mist, all the way to the exit. When they entered the water country, they went downstream from the high terrain on the south side. When they left the water country, they had to go upstream and go north along a river from another exit. After sailing for about 2 hours, the mountain wall that was originally tens of thousands of feet high slowly became shorter, and the surface of the lake gradually rose. The sky became open and spacious, and a pale white moon was still hanging in the sky that had not yet disappeared. After traveling for another dozen or so miles and passing through a few river channels, it was already the time of the morning. The sun was rising and the morning clouds were dancing. The surface of the river was golden and the clouds were swept away. A giant mountain wall appeared in front of them. In the belly of the mountain was a cave that was more than 600 meters tall. Rapid water flowed through it and made splashing sounds. Occasionally, 1 or 2 red-crowned cranes would fly by. Luo Xiao said, after crossing this river, we will be officially out of the water country's territory. Without the magnetic force of the earth vein, we can fly. At this time, she suddenly turned around and said, Lang Jun, look. That boat is following us. Zhang Yan looked back and saw a boat approaching from the distance. Soon, it was 600 or 700 meters away. A cultivator wearing azure clothes stood at the bow of the boat. He immediately recognized him as the Mystic Light Realm cultivator that he had passed by at the South Kasha Palace. Noticing Zhang Yan's gaze, the man's face darkened. He pressed his fingers together and pointed. A bright light flashed, and a sword light tore through the air. Luo Xiao hurriedly stepped forward to block it. The black profound light on his body shone and stopped the flying sword like a screen. Seeing that it couldn't land, the flying sword flew back with a whoosh. Zhang Yan asked from afar, Sir, who are you? The azure-robed cultivator shouted, Zhang Yan, do you still remember Shen Jingyue? Zhang Yan nodded and said, Of course senior martial brother Shen remembers. The azure-robed cultivator said harshly, I am Shen Jingyue's big brother, Shen Yifeng. That day at the sweeping cloud peak, you caused my brother to vomit blood and die. Today, I have come to take your life. However, Zhang Yan started to laugh loudly. Shen Yifeng was stunned and said angrily, What are you laughing at? Zhang Yan smiled coldly and said, Those who kill will always be killed. I am laughing at how you want to kill me today, but you don't know that I can kill you today. Shen Yifeng flew into a rage and said, Junior, I will let you know my power today. He waved his sleeve outwards, and several streaks of sword light instantly flew over like waterfalls. The profound light on Luo Xiao's body swept up and wrapped around a flying sword. At this moment, another sword light came slashing over. Her profound light spread and stopped it as well. However, she didn't know that there were 4 more sword lights coming at her. She took half a step back, and a magic sword appeared in her hand. She pushed 3 flying swords away with great difficulty, but when the 6th sword light came, she could no longer block it and had to retreat. She didn't have a weapon in her hand, so the 6 sword lights kept coming. She was forced to retreat step by step and was surrounded by danger. When Zhang Yan saw this, he immediately threw out an item and said, "Fellow Taoist Luo, catch it." Luo Xiao hurriedly caught it. Once it was in her hand, she calmed her mind and saw a sword light coming down. She waved her hand to block it, and with a clang, a flying sword was hit. The spiritual light on the sword disappeared and it fell to the ground. Taking advantage of this gap, she made a hand seal and said, "Go." The magic treasure in her hand flew into the air, and there was a sound of metal exploding. It knocked down a flying sword head-on, and with a horizontal collision, it broke another flying sword. When Shen Yefeng saw that 3 flying swords were broken, he couldn't help but be shocked. He saw that the item in Luo Xiao's hand was shining with a red light, and it was shaped like a hammer. He could tell that it was a magic treasure that could break flying swords, so he hurriedly called back the remaining flying swords. How could Luo Xiao let it go? The hammer in her hand chased after it, and with a clang, it knocked down another flying sword. It fell into the surging river and disappeared in an instant. When Shen Yefeng called back the flying swords, he saw that there were only 2 flying swords left in his hand. He snorted and said, "Since you're not perfect, what's the use of keeping you?" He used force, and with 2 ka sounds, the 2 flying swords were broken, and he threw them on the deck. His gaze was like a sword's blade as he stared at the opposite ship. He made a hand seal, and a golden light came out from the middle of his forehead. He pointed his finger forward and said, "Kill." Luo Xiao's expression changed slightly, and she quickly shouted, "Lang Jun, quickly dodge. This is a sword pellet." After a cultivator cultivated the mysterious light, he would then use a fine gold object to refine a sword pellet. After refining it, it would become one with the mind, and the mysterious light could then be attached to it, and it could be used to fly and kill people. After this sword pellet was repeatedly refined, its quality would become better and better. When it was used, it would be like using one's own arm, flexible and unpredictable. Even if a normal treasure could block it once, it would not be able to block the subsequent attacks. In a head-on battle, the person who used the sword pellet was usually the hardest to deal with. This was because once the magic treasure was used, the swordsman would see that the situation was not good, and he could use the sword ray to escape. When the opponent withdrew the magic treasure, he could turn around again. If this person's swordsmanship was a little more profound, after a few rounds, he would be able to find a flaw, and kill a peer of the same cultivation base with his sword. Seeing the sword pellet flying over, Luo Xiao hurriedly drove the hammer to meet it. Unfortunately, she had not refined this magic treasure with her heart blood, so it was inevitable that she was a little slow when she used it. The sword pellet circled around and went straight towards Zhang Yan. Luo Xiao saw that she could not stop it in time, and she could not help but turn pale. At this moment, the sky above her head darkened, and the wide river in front of her was also blocked by a mountain wall. It turned out that the ship had turned into a bend, and the sword pellet that was flying in the air paused for a moment before flying back. Luo Xiao let out a sigh of relief and said, "Luckily this flying sword has not awakened its sword spirit, or else once its spirituality is formed, the sword and the soul will be one, and the sword will be able to reflect the sword pellet's location in the heart, and it will not lose its target." At this point, she could not help but sigh and said, "Back then, I walked the Qi path. If I practiced the strength path, and changed my Xian technique, my whole body would be as hard as metal, and with a divine weapon in hand, why would I be afraid of his white essence sword pellet?" However, Zhang Yan was calm and composed, as if victory was in his grasp, and said, "Fellow Taoist, don't be anxious. Right now, even though his aura is at its peak, he is not far from death. Those who use flying swords are able to attack and escape, and if they want to fight, they can fight, and if they want to escape, they can escape. But now that the magnetization force of the earth veins is preventing him from escaping, and now that he is bent on killing me, he has already lost his biggest advantage. In this case, if the two of us still cannot kill him, wouldn't it be a joke? Chapter 63. Zhang Yan saw that there were many twists and turns in the river ahead and immediately had an idea. He tilted his head and whispered a few words to Luo Xiao. The latter understood and leaped into the surging river. Her movements were light and there was not a single wave. Zhang Yan himself used a spell to create fog. In a split second, a large fog seemed to descend from the sky. Not only did it envelop the 5 big ships, even the surface of the river was shrouded by a faint cloud and mist. The scenery near and far was faintly discernible, like an illusion yet real. When Xin Yefeng's ship turned from the bend in the waterway, he saw the scene of the foggy river before him and could not help but frown. If he could cultivate his spirit to the point of merging with the sword pill, then he would not need to care about the fog in front of him. He only needed to slash with his sword and no spell would be able to block his mind's eye. But now he could not help but feel a trace of irritation. As long as he got out of this river, the opponent would be able to fly away. At that time, he could just hide in the deep mountains, and where would he go to find him? Just at this moment, he felt a sudden tremor under his feet. The body of the ship shook violently and then the person driving the boat shouted, "It's leaking, it's leaking." Shen Yefeng was startled. Even though the river flow here was rapid, the people he chose to drive the boat were all experts in the water country. They traveled on this river all year round. Even with their eyes closed, they could walk back and forth. Even if there was some fog, how could something happen so easily? This must be Zhang Yan's doing. He sneered, "You want to stop me with such insignificant tricks?" He leaped down from the bow of the ship, the profound light under his feet supporting the soles of his feet. He stepped on the water and rushed into the fog. He followed the sound and chased after the ship in front. There was a light sound on the surface of the water. Luo Xiao slid out and leaped back onto the deck. There was not a drop of water on her body. She said with a smile, "Lang Jun, I have broken through his ship." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Well done." Although the front was filled with mist, he could still see Xin Yefeng's figure clearly. With a calm expression, he reached into his sleeve, took out the soul-calming inkstone and destiny pen and threw them to Luo Xiao. He then whispered a few words to Luo Xiao. He took out the gold magnetic copper mirror and placed it by his hand, his eyes staring straight ahead. Xin Yefeng didn't know that his every move was being watched by the other party. After running 100 steps on the water, he heard the sound of the ship in front of him getting louder. He knew that the other party wasn't far from him. He waved his sleeve and a talisman paper leaped into the air. He slapped it with his palm and shouted, "Break!" The talisman paper spontaneously combusted and floated forward. In the blink of an eye, it attached itself to the hull of the ship. Then, a ball of blue flame exploded with a boom. Sparks flew in all directions, and the fog within a radius of 50 feet was suddenly swept away. Once his field of vision opened, Xin Yefeng immediately saw the figures of Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao clearly. Without any hesitation, he pointed forward with his finger and the golden sword pill that was coiling at his side paused. With a dash, it stabbed towards Zhang Yan. At the same time, Luo Xiao shook her wrist and a cloud-patterned vermilion brush flew into the air. However, it wasn't heading towards the sword pill, but straight towards Xin Yefeng. In the blink of an eye, the sword pill had arrived in front of Zhang Yan. Just as the sword pill was about to pierce through him, a white light suddenly flashed. The fate-determining jade tablet automatically flew out from his chest and accurately blocked the sword pill. The two collided in the air and both became stagnant. Chance. Zhang Yan's gaze focused and he tossed the gold magnetic copper mirror in his right hand up. The copper mirror flipped in the air and a ray of light shone down. This seemingly substantial light instantly fixed the sword pill in place. Seeing that the sword pill was fixed, Xin Yefeng was shocked. Just as he wanted to call the sword pill back, he saw that the destiny pen was already in front of him. He had no choice but to give up on this action. With a wave of his sleeve, dozens of talisman papers rose up and burned in an instant. A ball of gray smoke blocked in front of him. The destiny pen only needed to brush and it disappeared completely. Without control, the destiny pen also lost its spiritual vigor and flew back again. At this moment, seeing that the sword pill was struggling left and right in the light, how could Zhang Yan allow it to escape? He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of evil spirit mixed with yin and yang poison. In an instant, it was like throwing a soldering iron into cold water. With a chi sound, the mysterious light on the sword pill dimmed and a trace of stiffness appeared in the shifting. Luo Xiao had already received Zhang Yan's instructions. Seeing that the opportunity had indeed appeared, she raised the heart-striking hammer in her left hand that had been waiting for a long time. This time, it hit the sword pill squarely. With a ping sound, the mysterious light on the sword pill shook violently like a candle in the wind and could be extinguished at any time. Shen Yefeng pulled his hand out and tried to summon the sword pill back. Unfortunately, the mysterious light on the sword pill had dissipated by more than half. He could only see it swaying in the light of the copper mirror and couldn't escape. He immediately shouted and spat out a mysterious light. This mysterious light contained the image of gold and iron. It was formed by his chi dynamic and wasn't inferior to a normal flying sword. It wasn't a mysterious light that was entrusted with gold and white. Luo Xiao, however, wasn't afraid. She also separated a ray of mysterious light from her body to block it. Her hand didn't stop as she controlled the heart-striking hammer to hit the sword pill again. With an explosive sound, the mysterious light on the sword pill dissipated. With a kacha sound, a crack appeared on the sword pill. It lost its spiritual energy and fell from the sky. Shen Yefeng felt a pain in his heart and spat out a mouthful of blood. When he raised his eyes to look, he couldn't help but be furious. The sword pill had lost all its light under the joint attack of Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao. It was like an ordinary object and obviously, it had been broken. More than half of his abilities were based on the sword pill. Now that it was broken, he saw that Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao were hard to deal with. Hesitation appeared on his face. When Zhang Yan saw that he seemed to have the intention to retreat, he was afraid that he would leave just like that. He deliberately mocked loudly, "Shen Yefeng, you came with such a menacing aura. To think that I thought you had some other abilities. So it turns out that you're only a so-so. Now that your sword pill has been broken, let's see what else you have to hurt me with." When Shen Yefeng heard this, his blood rushed up and he was so angry that his body trembled. He shouted sternly, "Zhang Yan, you brat, do you think I can't take your life?" With a wave of his hand, more than a dozen shining talismans flew over. They actually emitted a sharp aura of gold and iron. A look of contempt appeared in Luo Xiao's eyes. He snorted lightly and raised the life-announcing brush in his hand. The brush twirled and swiped in the air. It was as if it had drawn an invisible aura field. In the blink of an eye, all the talisman papers were wiped away. After Zhang Yan put away the copper mirror, he saw the opportunity and waved his sleeve. A green light went straight to the opponent's chest. Before the Rui spirit shuttle arrived in front of him, Shen Yefeng suddenly felt the hair on his body stand up. A sense of danger surged in his heart. He didn't have time to do anything else. The profound light behind him surged like a tide and instantly condensed into a point in front of him to block the Rui spirit shuttle. With great difficulty, he blocked the Rui spirit shuttle. On the other side, Luo Xiao controlled the destiny pen to descend on him. He couldn't help but shout and a profound light actually surged from his body to meet it. With a turn of the Xian Ming brush, this ray of profound light brushed over and when it landed again, another ray of profound light appeared on Shen Yefeng's body to block it. Luo Xiao used the brush to brush 3 times in a row, but every time it brushed over, Shen Yefeng would produce another ray, as if his vital essence was inexhaustible. Suddenly, he realized that the opponent might have some treasure that could replenish his vital qi. She sneered and 2 black needles appeared in the profound light behind her. These were the sharp poison needles that she had personally refined. They were refined by the poison in her teeth. The color and luster were exactly the same as her profound light. When they were activated, they were silent. When they were activated, the profound light would suddenly shoot out and injure people. It was impossible to guard against it. Back then, He Feng was stabbed by this formation by her and his body turned stiff. He couldn't move, so she easily took his life. Her left hand secretly held the heart-striking hammer. When another profound light brushed past Shen Yifeng's body, she immediately threw it out. At this moment, Shen Yifeng was also in a rather difficult situation. He already had the intention to retreat. He just wanted to escape, but he was entangled by the Rui spirit shuttle. He knew how powerful this thing was. It was already so difficult to block it from the front, so how could he let it chase behind him? Just as he was looking for an opportunity to escape, he saw that the destiny pen had just retreated when the heart-striking hammer came again. He couldn't help but be startled. Just as he was about to use his profound light to block it, he felt as if something had flashed past his eyes. His body instantly became numb and his chi stagnated. At this moment, he could only barely tilt his body. Bang! The heart-striking hammer instantly shattered his shoulder. With a miserable cry, he could no longer stabilize his body and fell into the water. Seeing that Shen Yifeng had fallen into the water, Zhang Yan knew that his goal had been achieved. He hurriedly shouted, "Fellow Taoist Luo." Luo Xiao nodded in response. She raised her right palm and a huge black inkstone unfolded in the air. When the soul-suppressing inkstone was used by Zhang Yan, it was only 5 zhang in size. However, in Luo Xiao's hand, it instantly expanded to a radius of 300 zhang. Even this section of the river was enveloped within it. Luo Xiao shouted and flipped her palm. The soul-suppressing inkstone fell towards the place where Shen Yifeng had fallen. Bang! A huge wave rolled and surged. Even the 5 boats on the river were pushed 100 zhang away and overturned. The beautiful fish demons that were originally on the boat jumped into the water one after another. They didn't show any fear. Instead, they cheered and jumped. However, they all had a blood contract with them, so Zhang Yan wasn't afraid that they would escape. Luo Xiao stared at the surface of the river a few times. Seeing that there wasn't any movement, she put away the inkstone and dived into the water. The soul-suppressing inkstone had the ability to stabilize one's soul and body. Shen Yifeng, who was poisoned, definitely wouldn't be able to escape in a short period of time. After suffering such a blow, he definitely couldn't be more dead. Zhang Yan stood on the surface of the water and moved up and down with the waves. When the waves gradually calmed down, Luo Xiao dived out and threw a Qiankuan sleeve pouch to Zhang Yan. She said, "This person's corpse is rotten and his primordial spirit has already dispersed." Zhang Yan reached out to receive it and opened it to take a look. He saw that other than elixirs, there were also a few Taoist books on this person. He took it out to take a look and saw that the words, "Talisman Pouch Book," were written on it. It was the Guangyuan sect's secret method of making talismans. He casually flipped through it and saw that there were many densely packed notes between the lines. He couldn't help but take a few more glances. This book was originally meant to be given to Jiang Yu by Shen Yifeng after the elixir gathering. Therefore, the notes inside were written with great effort. Who knew that it would benefit Zhang Yan now? Thinking about how those flying talismans could actually slightly resist talismans and had various other wonderful uses, he couldn't help but feel a warmth in his heart and became engrossed in reading. At this moment, Luo Xiao came to his side and took out an item. She said, "Lang Jun, take a look at this." "What is this?" Zhang Yan raised his head and saw that the item in Luo Xiao's hand seemed to be a talisman as well. However, there was a golden light circulating on it and spiritual energy lingering around it. With one look, one could tell that it was not an ordinary item. Luo Xiao said excitedly, "This item is called an essence talisman. It is unique to the Guangyuan sect and was refined by an elder in the sect. It can be used to channel one's primordial spirit into it, and when one fights with others, one can use it. It is very useful." this is an essence talisman. Hearing about the origin of this item, Zhang Yan's eyes couldn't help but show a hint of joy. Chapter 64. Zhang Yan had once heard that the Guangyuan sect used to be an expert in talisman crafting. They were also arrogant and conceited, so they had offended quite a number of sections. After the great change that happened 1,000 years ago, a few of the sect's top elders passed away, and the whereabouts of the sect leader were also unknown. Their successors also lacked outstanding talents, so they were attacked by a few hostile sects, which resulted in a great loss to their vitality. Since then, they had fallen from a first-rate sect to a second-rate sect, and in the end, they still relied on Nanhua sect to protect them. However, every 10 years, they had to offer a large number of secret talisman to Nanhua sect, and among them was this talisman of vitality. With this talisman of vitality in hand, one would not have to worry about running out of energy during battles, and it was indeed a good thing. Zhang Yan packed up the things in his hands, and gathered the hundreds of fish demon beauties again. Seeing that this place was not far from the range of the magnetization of the earth vein, he simply walked on the waves. After less than 20 miles, he felt that the feeling of restriction on his body had gradually weakened, and so he released 3 flying boats, carrying all the fish demon beauties on board, and flew up into the sky, all the way west back to Yutsang sect. After traveling for more than a month, the Great Lake of Dragon Lake was impressively in sight. On this return journey, Zhang Yan successively refined 2 more breaths of spiritual qi, leaving only 1 breath of spiritual qi that was about to close. This was because when he was trying to break through the 3rd realm of clear qi, he suddenly felt that the time was not right. Since breaking through the bottleneck was right in front of him, he was not in a hurry at this moment, and simply decided to go back to the sect to think about it. So for the rest of the time, he immersed his mind into the remnant jade, using it on how to refine the heavy water of serene yin. One must know that the reason why this technique was called technique was because other than needing the cold yin qi, it also had its own set of complicated operation and refining process. The qi movement needed to travel back and forth in the meridians, up and down, and extract the turbidity and lead. The complexity was almost comparable to the record of Xianyuan that he used to open the meridians. According to the Secret Book of Lan Yun, every time a drop of serene yin heavy water was refined, it would take 108 days. In his opinion, if a cultivator wasn't familiar with this method to a certain degree, then even if he endured for a few more days, he still wouldn't be able to succeed. Fortunately, he had the remnant jade in his hand. 1 month's worth of effort was equivalent to less than 2 years' time. After the flying boat entered the Great Lake of Dragon Lake, a patrolling disciple on duty came up to inquire. Seeing that it was a true disciple returning from the water country of the Dang region, they were very respectful. Zhang Yan had no obstructions along the way. He first returned to Spirit Page Island, opened the restriction, and settled Luo Xiao and the fish demon's beauties, and then flew back to Danding Courtyard. Since he was already in the sect, he was not in a hurry, so he sailed, and can-sailed, and slowly, and enjoyed the scenery. Of Can, and Qi, and went. Yan, now at sect. Sect, and of Zhang, and scholars Dao sect, and walked, and walked, and went. And walked. And entered. And walked. And master, and went. Of. Zhang Yan straightened his clothes outside the door and stepped into the loft. Seeing him come in, Zhou Chengju put down the book in his hand, and said, "Junior Marshal brother, it's only been 5 months. Why have you returned?" Zhang Yan found a stool and sat down, and sighed, "It's a long story. I met a pill master in the water country, and his name is Ren Kai. He is very familiar with the situation in the water country, and has a good relationship with a few tribe leaders. From what he said, I learned that the tribes are buying large quantities of metal heavenly weapons, sharp fangs, and sharp blades. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I saw that King Zhen was not secretive, and didn't look like a leader, and the city was full of killing intent, so I left as soon as possible." Zhou Chengju's spirit was lifted, and he said, "You got the book, let me see." Zhang Yan took out a golden book from his sleeve, and handed it over. Zhou Chengju took it and flipped through it. Other than the king's seal, there was only King Zhen's seal, and the tribe leaders' seals were missing. Zhou Chengju shook his head, and said, "It seems like Junior Marshal Brother is right. The tribe leaders and Ji Zhoshang seem to be in harmony, but they are actually divided. Otherwise, they wouldn't have handed over this book in a hurry. Once the water country is in chaos, we will have to fight with the 3 lake demons again, and this book is as good as not. But we can stand on the side of righteousness, and you have done a good job." This book was placed in the Xian Luo Daoist robe, and was sent to Zhang Yan. Initially, he was curious about the other party's intentions, but later on, he gradually understood. It was likely that some of the tribe leaders in the water country didn't agree to give the lustrous cloud shell field to the Qiansong faction, but Ji Zhoshang was preparing to help King Zhen ascend the throne, and was afraid that the Qiansong faction would turn hostile at this time. Therefore, he bypassed the tribe leaders, and gave the Qiansong faction a reassurance pill, so that when the affairs of the country were sorted out, there wouldn't be any objections. Zhou Chengju put down the golden book, and asked, "I heard that the diplomatic mission was intercepted by the water demons of the Shenjin stream on the road, and the Su family sent people to rescue you just now, but this time, the Su family lost a disciple. Is this true?" Zhang Yan laughed coldly, and said, "The Su family really put on a good show." Zhou Chengju revealed an expression as if he had already expected this. Seeing that Zhang Yan didn't elaborate on the details, he didn't ask any more, but patted the golden book, and said, "I will hand this book to the sect leader. Since Junior Apprentice Brother has already returned, why don't you go to the green rock screen wall of Luo Island to listen to the preaching? Today is coincidentally the day when Elder Chen will be imparting the sect's flying sword technique, and the disciples of the younger generation can go and listen to the preaching. This is a rare opportunity, you can't miss it." A disciple who had entered the sect for 16 years was considered a generation, and this generation did not refer to the relationship between the master and the disciple, but the seniority of the disciple. Zhang Yan had entered the upper house for less than a year, and according to this, he was indeed of the younger generation. Imparting the flying sword technique? Zhang Yan's expression changed, and he remembered how Shen Yefeng used the flying sword to force Luo Shao to retreat step by step on the surface of the river, almost unable to resist. If it wasn't for the various treasures in hand and the geographical advantage, it would be extremely difficult to deal with this person. He had long heard that out of the 16 major sects of the Donghua continent, only the disciples of 5 sects could control the sword ball in the clear Qi period, and the Yutsang sect was one of them. Today, when he returned to the sect, someone was imparting the flying sword technique, and he felt that he should go and observe. After speaking a few more words with Zhou Chengju, he stood up and left. After leaving the fishing boat, he drove the flying boat straight to Luo Island. An hour later, an island that was like a large basin surrounded by mountains and lush trees appeared in front of him. On the north side of the island, there was a huge green tablet that was 900 feet tall and as smooth as a mirror. In front of this stone was a wide flat ground. At this moment, there were many people moving about, and at a glance, there were probably tens of thousands of people. Every year, the elders of the Yutsang sect had to open a forum and preach Tao, imparting various profound and mystical techniques. Now, it was Elder Chen's turn to preach Tao, and this elder did not care if one had a master or came from the cold manual, as long as one was of the younger generation, one could come and listen to the preaching. Arriving here, Zhang Yan did not dare to fly rashly. He came down from the flying boat from afar and walked to this flat ground. He saw that there was a stone block below each disciple, and now they were almost all seated, except for 2 empty seats in front. Just as he was about to step over, a female cultivator not far away stood up and called out to him, "Senior brother, those seats in front are for Senior brother Yun and Senior brother Meng, there are still empty seats here." Zhang Yan was startled and looked back. He saw that the female cultivator was about 15 or 16 years old, with a round face and cherry lips, delicate and pretty, and a sense of innocence in her bright eyes. He saw that there was indeed a stone block beside her, as if someone had just left, so he walked up to it and said with a smile, "Then I'll have to thank this junior sister." This female cultivator saw Zhang Yan's gaze at this moment, but her face turned slightly red, and she said, "Senior brother is too polite. It would not be good if I offended a few senior brothers with profound cultivation." The seats here were actually arranged according to cultivation. At the very front were disciples at the second and third level of clear qi, and below them were disciples at the first level of clear qi, the channel opening disciples. The Tai golden book that Zhang Yan cultivated was filled with hidden murderous intent. Those who did not have a higher cultivation would definitely not be able to see his realm, so it was normal for people to mistake his cultivation for not being high. After Zhang Yan sat down, he cupped his hands and said, "I still haven't asked for junior sister's name." "My name is Qin Nan, I don't know senior brother." The female cultivator wanted to ask for Zhang Yan's name, but who knew that just as her cherry lips opened, she heard a chime that leisurely spread throughout the whole place. A Taoist boy stood up and shouted, "The time has come, the patriarch is opening the altar to preach, all disciples are not to make a racket." Everyone immediately became silent, and focused their attention in front of them. Zhang Yan looked up and saw that there was a stone platform on the left side of the screen wall. A broad-faced and long-bearded Daoren sat on it, and he must be that elder Chen. He waved the horsetail whisk in his hand, and a disciple that followed beside him stood up. This disciple came in front of the green stone screen wall, and touched his forehead. Instantly, a spot of white light flew out, and a sword pellet leaped into the air, and danced around his body. He looked at Elder Chen, and the latter slowly nodded his head. He then turned around and said loudly to the crowd, "This sword skill is called the genuine source sword scripture. After today's viewing, all disciples are not to privately teach it to each other, or else there will be severe punishment according to the sect rules." After a pause, he said again, "All of you, watch carefully." He pressed his fingers together, and the white sword pellet flew 300 yards away like an arrow that left the bow. Then, it started to dance in the air, and for a moment, light and shadow shuttled back and forth, like 100 silver fish playing in the water. It was a dazzling sight. In the end, he made a hand sign, and said, "Return." The sword pellet returned to his forehead. After he was done with the sword skill, he cupped his hands in greeting to all the disciples, and returned to stand beside Elder Chen. At this moment, a few cries of surprise came from the disciples below. It turned out that the green stone screen wall that was close to 300 yards tall was rippling, and traces of sword skill appeared. Looking closely, it was as if a shadowless immortal was moving and dancing inside. It was actually the same sword skill that the disciple had used just now, just that it was magnified by several tens of times, and even the minute changes could be seen clearly. This was the green stone screen wall of Yingtsang sect. As long as one practiced in front of this rock, the spell and movements that were used would be reflected, and only after it was replayed once would it dissipate. All the disciples knew that this was a rare opportunity, and they all stared at it closely, afraid that they would miss even the slightest detail. Zhang Yan was also watching with rapt attention, and he faintly seemed to have understood something. When the light and shadow on the screen wall disappeared, Elder Chen's eyelids closed, as if he was squinting. He pointed his horsetail whisk at a disciple sitting in the front row, and slowly said, "Feng Ming, did you see it clearly?" This disciple stood up, and said in a clear voice, "This sword skill is exquisite and profound. With disciples' cultivation and knowledge, I can only barely remember it." Elder Chen nodded, and with a point of his finger, a white light flew into this person's hand, and said, "Come up and practice it." "Yes." This disciple took the sword pellet, and walked forward. Facing the gazes of over 10,000 disciples, he was as calm as usual. Taking a deep breath, the sword pellet in his hand rose, and he once again practiced that sword skill. Zhang Yan asked in a low voice, "Who is this person?" Qin Nan asked curiously, "Senior brother doesn't know Feng Ming, senior brother Feng?" "Among our generation, he is brimming with talent. He has been in the sect for 15 years, and is already an expert in the third level of Qi Clear Realm. It is said that he is already looking for cloud sand to condense the seed of mysterious light." He is a person that all the masters think highly of. After she finished speaking, Qin Nan's flushed face was filled with worship. Sword light soared on the field, and the sword pellet flew non-stop in his hand. Zhang Yan took a few more glances, and realized that this person's talent was indeed not bad. Even though everyone here could roughly remember this set of sword skill, the intricate and profound parts weren't that easy to do. This person could only rely on his comprehension to imitate a little, and that was already hard to come by. After he finished practicing the flying sword skill, Feng Ming kept the sword pellet, and cupped his hands to the people around him. Even though he looked humble on the surface, the arrogance in his eyes couldn't be concealed. Elder Chen nodded slightly, and said, even though this set of positive source sword scripture is our sect's entry flying sword skill, it's not easy for you to practice it once in such a short time. He stretched out his hand to stroke his beard, and said, a few days ago, senior brother Sun in the sect practiced a set of sword pellets, which were made of star essence sand. There were originally 10 pellets, but he said that excess is a loss, so he gave me one of the pellets. Today, I will make it 10 days, and when the time comes, I will test you all again. If anyone can comprehend this sword skill to 1 or 2%, I will bestow this item. At this point, the eyes of the tens of thousands of disciples on the field were filled with excitement, and Feng Ming's eyes were also burning with passion. Star essence sand was something that only cultivators above Yuanying could refine. If he could obtain this sword pellet, his battle prowess would increase by more than a few times. Seeing that the disciples below were in high spirits, Elder Chen smiled slightly, and with a flick of his horsetail whisk, tens of thousands of white lights sprinkled down in an instant. Seeing a white light arrive in front of him, Zhang Yan stretched out his hand to catch it, and a platinum sword pellet fell into his hand. It was for him to practice his sword skill. He couldn't help but smile slightly. If it was a competition of cultivation, he hadn't reached the perfect 3rd level, so he was still 1 level behind. However, if it was a competition of comprehending sword skills, he wasn't afraid of anyone. Chapter 65. When the bell rang, Elder Chen's lips moved and a technique to control the sword pellet was transmitted into everyone's ears. Zhang Yan only felt that along with the mellow voice, an incantation went straight into his heart and appeared in his mind one by one. After carefully pondering over the sword forms, he realized that the key to this flying sword technique was all in this incantation. First, it explained how a cultivator could attach their spiritual chi to the sword pellet and control it to fly away. Next, it explained in detail the tricks to use the sword pellet to slash. Spiritual chi was refined from clear and turbid chi into one, so it could naturally be separated and combined. There were changes in yin and yang, allowing the sword pellet to flip up and down, back and forth. However, Zhang Yan felt that even though this sword technique could be practiced by tens of thousands of disciples present, only cultivators after the 2nd level of clear chi could use the most basic power of this technique. As for meridian opening cultivators, if they couldn't even refine a breath of clear chi, then they couldn't even think about controlling the sword pellet, let alone using a flying sword to attack the enemy. Therefore, only the cultivators sitting in the front row had the right to fight for the star's sword pellet. The others could only watch. At this moment, Qin Nan, who was beside Zhang Yan, cheered. The sword pellet in her hand actually rose up and floated in the air. At this moment, her face was filled with excitement as she grabbed Zhang Yan's sleeve and shook it fiercely, shouting, senior brother, look, look. Zhang Yan only smiled and didn't say anything. After a moment, Qin Nan came to her senses and hurriedly let go. She blushed and said, senior brother, don't be angry. Junior sister got carried away. Zhang Yan smiled and said, it's fine. When I condensed my first breath of clear chi, I was also as happy as junior sister. He nodded to himself. He didn't know which elder this Qin Nan cultivated under, but she could actually use a breath of clear chi to make the sword pellet float. Even if she couldn't improve further, it was only because of the limitation of her cultivation. Her aptitude was still extremely high. Looking at the surrounding disciples, most of them were staring at the sword pellet with a bitter expression or were still frowning as they used the incantation. Some even had blank expressions. How could they be as relaxed as she was? This female cultivator had an innocent heart that had yet to be polished. She didn't have any thoughts of gain or loss, which was why her spirit and will were compatible, and she focused on using the sword. He took another look at the disciples in front of him who were at the second and third level of clear chi. Seeing that the sword pills in their hands were already dancing up and down, he no longer hesitated. His mind sank into the broken jade, and the doppelganger that was originally sitting in the jade suddenly opened its eyes. Riding the sword, it began to carefully practice each stroke according to the moves seen on the bluestone wall. Although there were only 10 days in the outside world, there was more than half a year in the jade for him to slowly comprehend. Qin Nan saw that Zhang Yan was sitting there motionlessly, thinking that he was comprehending the incantation. She also knew that she shouldn't disturb him at this time, so she happily played with the sword pellet that was floating in the air. The sword moves described in the Positive Source Sword Sutra were actually just sword techniques that focused on finding opportunities to change when facing the enemy. For a cultivator at the level that Zhang Yan was at, there weren't many attacking methods that he could choose from. Therefore, he focused on honing the 3 most important sword techniques known as One Breath Completion, Rainbow Light Heavenly Ray, and High Layered Waves. The entire Sword Sutra was the secret of using chi to control the sword. He believed that if one wanted to evaluate a person's understanding of this set of sword techniques, one only had to look at how well these 3 techniques were grasped. Although his comprehension wasn't as good as some of the most talented disciples, he had a tenacious heart. He didn't spend time to comprehend the mysteries within, and only believed that practice makes perfect. Therefore, he repeatedly practiced in the broken jade, repeating these 3 sword techniques more than 1,000 times a day. However, although his body didn't feel tired in the jade, the consumption of his mind was real. Every day in the outside world, he would exit the broken jade, take a vitality pill, and silently rest for half an hour before re-entering the jade. Later on, he had slowly grasped the patterns and changes within, but he felt that this sword technique didn't seem to be fully understood, as if there were still moves that hadn't been passed down. However, this was also reasonable. It wasn't good to bite off more than one could chew. With the cultivation of the disciples present, if they couldn't even control the sword technique in front of them, how could they talk about the exquisite sword techniques in the future? Therefore, he only cared about consolidating the results in front of him and didn't think too much about other things. 10 days passed by in a flash. On this day, some of the disciples who couldn't even summon their sword pellets had already given up. Only those disciples who had a slight grasp of the knack were still pondering over the changes of the sword technique. Suddenly, a sound of a jade bell rang on the stone platform, and a Taoist child shouted, 10 days have passed, all disciples stop. The flying sword pellets all stopped and raised their heads to look at the stone platform. Elder Chen's gaze swept downwards. Even though his gaze was warm and did not contain any anger, for some reason, when he looked over, everyone's hearts jumped and they all lowered their heads, not daring to meet his gaze. Elder Chen's gaze finally fell on Feng Ming, and he said amiably, Feng Ming, how's your practice? Feng Ming hurriedly stood up and respectfully reported, although I still can't understand the principles behind it, I've grasped some of the knack. Chen Chang Daoren said, if that's the case, you can come up and demonstrate again. Let me see how much you've improved compared to 10 days ago. Feng Ming, however, stuck out his chest and cupped his fists, saying, Elder, if it's just a practice, I won't be able to show much. I'm willing to use this newly learned sword technique to exchange pointers with my fellow disciples to prove my understanding over the past few days. Hearing this, Elder Chen smiled and waved his horsetail whisk, saying, that's good too. With Elder Chen's permission, Feng Ming turned around and cupped his fists at the tens of thousands of disciples present, saying loudly, Senior brothers, if any of you think you have a unique understanding of this sword technique and are interested in competing for the star's sword pellet, you can come up and compete with me. These words were said with great arrogance, as if the disciples below the stage were nothing in his eyes. Immediately, someone stood out with a displeased expression. Although senior brother Feng entered the sect 2 years earlier than me and walked ahead of me, I also have the desire to improve myself, so I'm willing to try senior brother's means. Feng Ming looked towards the source of the voice, and he saw it was a disciple with a short figure and an ordinary appearance, so he laughed loudly and said, "So it's junior brother Wang Kuan, I almost didn't see you. You're from the Wang clan of Haopu, so I presume you're learned from your clan. Senior brother will seek guidance from you here." Wang Kuan could hear the sarcasm in the other party's words, and he was infuriated. He snorted and quickly walked forward, saying coldly, "Senior brother Feng, watch out." He threw the sword pellet in his hand up and pointed forward. With a flash of white light, the sword pellet rushed straight at Feng Ming. Feng Ming's expression was relaxed. He formed a hand seal, and the sword pellet in his hand soared up as well, crashing into the other party's sword pellet without dodging. With a clang, the two sword orbs collided with each other. Feng Ming's pellet was undamaged, but Wang Kuan's was shattered on the spot. The latter's face turned pale, and he took a few steps back. He stared at the other party with wide eyes and pointed at him, saying, You. Even after defeating his opponent, Feng Ming acted as if he had done something insignificant. He put his hands behind his back and said, "Junior brother, you've practiced this one breath in one breath pretty well. In just a short 10 days, you've managed to fuse your chi into one. It's a pity that you wanted to subdue me with force, but you only have 24 breaths of spiritual chi in your chest. No matter how much you fuse your chi into one spot, how can it compare to the 49 breaths of spiritual chi in my chest?" Hearing his words, the people below the stage gasped in surprise and sucked in a breath of cold air. Su Ming had actually refined 49 breaths of spiritual chi without anyone noticing. What kind of talent was that? Even some of the outstanding disciples in the sect could not easily reach the number of 36 breaths of spiritual chi in their chests, much less 49. One must know that there was a saying in mysterious arts, "Spiritual chi as the seed, mysterious light opens, primordial core bears fruit, and when one's cultivation reaches nascent soul." This spiritual chi would be the foundation for all Tao arts in the future. The more chi one had, the greater one's achievements in the future. With 49 breaths of spiritual chi in his chest, Feng Ming's future was practically limitless. Wang Kuan's face was pale. He lowered his head and said, "Junior brother, I'm not as skilled as you. I admit defeat." Feng Ming waved his hand and said, "Junior brother, don't be discouraged. It's normal to spar and compete in the sect. Don't let it cloud your mind, and it will affect your cultivation." Wang Kuan gritted his teeth and said, "I've learned my lesson. I'll ask for your advice in the future." Feng Ming laughed and said, "I'll be waiting for you anytime." When Wang Kuan returned to his seat with a dark face, Feng Ming looked around and said, "Is there any other junior brother who wants to come up and try?" "Let me try." Another disciple jumped out. However, this person was even worse than Wang Kuan. But this time, Feng Ming gave him face. After fighting with him for a dozen rounds, just now, he tapped the person's shoulder lightly with his sword pellet, causing him to lose. Following that, a few more disciples went up to ask for advice. However, those with discerning eyes could tell that these people were familiar with Su Ming. Rather than saying they were competing, it was better to say that they were supporting him. After a dozen rounds, Feng Ming's aura became stronger and stronger. His gaze also became fiercer and fiercer. His gaze would occasionally glance at a few aristocratic family disciples below the stage with a faint provocative look. Even though these disciples from aristocratic families were slightly annoyed in their hearts, they knew that they were indeed not Feng Ming's match. Not to mention anything else, just those 49 mouthfuls of spiritual chi was enough to suppress them to the point of losing their temper. Thus, they simply ignored his gaze and sat there in silence. On the stone platform, Elder Chen also nodded slightly. A hint of gratification appeared in his eyes. No one else noticed this expression, but it did not escape the eyes of Zhang Yan, who was below the stage. He could tell that the sword practice in front of the bluestone reflection wall this time had probably been arranged beforehand. The goal was to let Feng Ming obtain this star's sword pellet. Otherwise, why would Elder Chen mention his name again and not mention anyone else? The meaning was self-evident. The truth was not far from what he had guessed. Elder Chen was originally a master and a disciple. In recent years, because he saw that there were more and more outstanding disciples among the younger generation of aristocratic families, there was a faint momentum of them suppressing the master and disciple line. Therefore, he wanted to select a few talented disciples and focus on nurturing them. He would bestow flying swords and enchanted treasures to them, and then use the opportunity to raise them up to fight against the overbearing momentum of the younger generation of the aristocratic families. This Feng Ming was one of the predetermined candidates. This time, it was called sword imparting, but in reality, it was to reward him with the sword pellet made of star's essence sand. At this time, if it was another person who came, even if they could defeat Feng Ming, as long as they understood the inside story, they would still be wary. But Zhang Yan did not care. There was no warmth in the actions of immortal cultivation. It was all about fighting. Snatching. If you miss this opportunity today, you will fall a step behind. If you fall a step behind, you will fall behind at every step. At this time, you should cut off all your worries and follow your heart. Thinking of this, he made up his mind. At this time, there was already no one who dared to come forward to fight with Feng Ming. He shouted 3 times, but no one answered. Just as he was feeling complacent and wanted to turn around to receive the star's sword pellet, Zhang Yan stood up and said, "Wait, let me try first." Chapter 66. Feng Ming was so powerful that no matter if it was in terms of his comprehension of the sword scripture or his own accumulation, he faintly surpassed everyone present. At this moment, no one went up to do anything that would cause them to lose face. They originally thought that he would obtain the star's sword pill without any suspense, but who would have expected that Zhang Yan would stand out at this moment, instantly causing him to become the focus of everyone present. Feng Ming, who was about to step out, stopped and turned around. He saw Zhang Yan standing at the furthest place. It seemed to be the seats of some channel-opening disciples. He thought to himself, which disciple is this, how can he be so ignorant? However, even though he was slightly unhappy in his heart, he still put on a good front and revealed an easygoing smile. "If this junior brother is interested, you can come up and compare notes with me." Disciples like him, who were chosen by the elders, were the backbone to fight against the disciples of the Xianmen aristocratic families in the future. They also had to build their own team. Under the eyes of the crowd, he wanted to use his strength to suppress the disciples whose cultivation was close to his. But for the disciples whose cultivation was lower, he had to act friendly and win them over, in order to gain a good reputation. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Then please enlighten me, senior brother Feng." He waved his sleeve and stepped forward. Qin Nan's eyes had opened wide when he'd stepped forward, and at this moment, her face was filled with admiration as she gazed at his departing figure. She felt that if it was her, she would absolutely not dare to challenge Feng Ming, the person she admired in her heart. Wang Kuan's face changed when he saw Zhang Yan. As a member of the Haopu Wang family, he was also present during the battle between Wang Pan and Zhang Yan on Spirit Page Island. Naturally, he recognized Zhang Yan. Then, he seemed to think of something and suddenly turned to look at Feng Ming. There was a hint of schadenfreude in his eyes. Under the gaze of tens of thousands of disciples, Zhang Yan walked all the way to the bluestone screen wall and stood face to face with Feng Ming. Seeing his calm and composed look, Feng Ming did not dare to be careless. When Zhang Yan was far away, he did not take a closer look. Now that he had a closer look, he realized that although Zhang Yan's aura was obscure, it was full of spiritual vigor. It was obvious that he was a clear qi cultivator. However, he could not tell which realm he was in. He immediately put away his contempt, but did not really take it to heart. He smiled and said, "Junior brother, please make your move first." Zhang Yan had seen many of Feng Ming's techniques, but the opponent still knew nothing about him. He thought that if he made a surprise attack, he would have a great chance to take down this person. But to fight for the star's sword pill, one could not blindly fight. One also had to pay attention to the method. The situation today was not a competition to see who was stronger and who was weaker. The key was to see who had a deeper understanding of the righteous sword scripture in these 10 days. If he won too quickly, it could only say that his tactics were correct, or that his strength was stronger than the opponent, but it could not show how brilliant his swordsmanship was. By then, as long as Elder Chen was slightly biased towards Feng Ming, he would have the face, but the sword pill would still belong to the opponent. Wouldn't that be a waste of his efforts? Therefore, he could only defeat Feng Ming in the use of swordsmanship, so that the opponent would not find an excuse. Now that Feng Ming asked him to attack first, he did not stand on ceremony. He made a hand sign, and a white sword pill soared into the sky and floated above his head. He said, "Senior brother, be careful." As soon as he finished speaking, a white ray flew out at a speed that was hard to be seen by the naked eye. Someone below the stage immediately exclaimed, "Rainbow Light Heavenly Ray." The so-called Rainbow Light Heavenly Ray was to convert more than half of the spiritual qi attached to the sword into clear qi, and then use the sword to slash. It could reach an extremely fast speed in an instant, and the more clear qi there was, the faster the speed. In a short 10 days, most of the disciples at the second and third level of clear qi had only comprehended the method of completion in one breath, and only a few people had touched Rainbow Light Heavenly Ray. Now that they saw Zhang Yan raise his hand, they could not help but exclaim. The sword pill almost crashed in front of Feng Ming in the blink of an eye. He was also shocked, and hurriedly wanted to use the sword pill to fly out to block the enemy, but in the end, he was a beat too slow. At this moment, it was already too late to block. Seeing that he was about to be defeated, he saw that the sword pill slightly paused when it was about to touch his robe, and then retracted. His back unconsciously broke out in a cold sweat. Zhang Yan retracted the sword pill and let it float above his finger. He smiled and said, "Senior brother Feng, don't be distracted." Because he attacked quickly and retracted quickly, no one below the stage saw any flaws, and thought that his sneak attack had been blocked by Feng Ming. A few disciples who were on good terms with Feng Ming immediately cheered. Elder Chen, who was watching the battle on the stage, frowned slightly. Feng Ming's eyes were first filled with surprise and doubt, but then he quickly calmed down and said in a low voice, "Junior brother is brilliant, but you won't be so lucky next." From the previous attack, he could tell that Zhang Yan's speed in controlling the sword pill was slightly better than his, and he definitely could not compete with him in speed. However, if he was on guard, he would not be afraid of that sneak attack. After all, the two of them were separated by a distance of about 30 meters, and he could intercept it in advance. As early as a month ago, Elder Sun had secretly imparted this sword manual to him, which was why he had the confidence to go against everyone. It was just that he did not want to be too obvious, and it was inevitable that he would be criticized, so he did not use his full strength. At this moment, he had already made up his mind. Once the other party attacked again, he would use one breath complete to knock down the other party's sword pill. He had 49 mouthfuls of spiritual qi in his chest, and if they were gathered at one place to attack the enemy, no one present would be able to stop him. This was his greatest reliance, and winning with strength was what he should do. Just now, the other party did not seize the opportunity to defeat him in one breath. That was because the other party was stupid, but in the future, he would not have such a flaw. Feng Ming pointed with his finger, and the sword pill flew up and hovered 30 feet in front of him. He had adopted a defensive stance. Not many people below the stage found it strange, and they just thought that he wanted to give his junior brother a chance to exchange blows, so he was defending and not attacking. When Zhang Yan saw this, he knew what he was planning. He smiled in his heart, and the spell in his hand changed again. The sword pill floating above his fingers suddenly spun, making a big circle, and attacked Feng Ming at a speed no slower than before. Feng Ming hurriedly controlled the sword pill to meet it. Seeing that the two were about to come into contact, he could not help but reveal a happy expression. Who knew that at this moment, Zhang Yan's sword pill would suddenly turn in the air and go around him? This time, Feng Ming was shocked, and did not dare to hold back. The spell in his hand changed, and the sword pill also turned, trying to go forward to block. Seeing that they were about to collide again, Zhang Yan's sword pill turned again. Feng Ming was shocked, and did not dare to let him come over. His sword pill also turned, and once again went to meet him. The two sword pills were like birds chasing each other. After turning a few times in the air, the disciples below finally saw the trick, and they all cried out in surprise, "Layered waves." This was the most difficult technique to grasp in the clear chi realm of the positive source sword scripture. First, one would use a breath of spiritual chi to drive the sword pill to turn one round to attack the enemy. If it missed or met with obstruction, the second breath of spiritual chi would superimpose on it, and it would spin again. After repeating this a few times, the speed of the sword pill would become faster and faster, and the power it contained would also become stronger and stronger, until the enemy could not block it or avoid it. If one wanted to use this technique well, they had to have a good grasp of both, completed in one breath, and rainbow light heavenly ray. After the two sword pills turned 28 times in the air, Zhang Yan's sword pill had already closed in to within 30 feet of Feng Ming. At this time, Feng Ming was already a little exhausted from running for his life. Unlike Zhang Yan, who took the initiative to attack, every time he defended, he had to spend twice the energy, and only then could he barely keep up with his opponent's speed. In the end, he was sweating profusely, but he still clenched his teeth and persevered, feeling that there was still hope in his heart. This was because an attack like layered waves also had its limits, and that was, it could not exceed the upper limit of one's spiritual chi. If there were 36 breaths of spiritual chi in one's chest, the sword pill could at most turn 36 times. He did not believe that his opponent could still beat him in this aspect. As long as he could get through this difficulty, the opponent's chest would be full of spiritual chi, and then he could only let himself be slaughtered. Chapter 67. Fighting flying swords in the clear chi stage was like commanding an army on two sides. The spiritual energy in the chest was the army. Now, Feng Ming felt that he had more spiritual energy than his opponent. It was just that his opponent had suddenly used trickery, causing him to be unable to gather his troops in one place. That was why he was at a disadvantage. If he couldn't suppress him in one breath, when he could catch his breath, he firmly believed that his opponent would be the one to lose. According to his estimation, the spiritual energy in Zhang Yan's chest was at most between 36 and 42. He just had to hold on for a little longer. With this in mind, he naturally struggled to hold on under Zhang Yan's pressure, waiting for the moment when the situation could be reversed. When the two sword pills turned to 36, he saw that Zhang Yan was still fighting with ease. He couldn't help but feel a little flustered, but in the end, he was still calm. However, he felt that his strength was not enough, and a sense of fear rose in his heart for no reason. As time passed, this feeling became more and more intense. When the 42nd turn passed, a thought that even he didn't believe flashed through Feng Ming's mind. His body gradually trembled, and the movement of controlling the sword pill became more and more strenuous. At this moment, he could only stiffly turn with Zhang Yan's sword pill, and couldn't even talk about fighting back. When it reached the 48th turn, he could no longer hold on. He couldn't even muster his last breath, and the sword pill couldn't help but stagnate. But Zhang Yan's sword pill actually turned easily again, and rushed straight towards Feng Ming. The latter could only watch helplessly, but was powerless to stop it. With a "pa" sound, Feng Ming was hit in the chest by Zhang Yan's sword pill. He took 2 steps back, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. His expression also changed a few times. First, it was unwillingness, then it was bewilderment, and finally, it was shame and anger. Zhang Yan smiled faintly, and cupped his hands towards Feng Ming. "Senior martial brother, thank you for letting me win." Feng Ming, however, stood there without speaking or moving. No one knew what he was thinking, but his hands kept shaking. Elder Chen, who was watching the battle from the stone platform, frowned. He waved his horsetail whisk and said something in a low voice. The Taoist child beside him stepped forward and said, Patriarch has ordered this senior martial brother to come up and have a chat. Zhang Yan calmly walked onto the stone platform and saluted Elder Chen. However, he did not salute as a junior, but as an equal. Seeing this, Elder Chen was displeased and asked coldly, Let me ask you, have you ever learned this flying sword technique before? Zhang Yan shook his head and said, No. Elder Chen pointed his horsetail whisk at him and shouted coldly, Tut! Don't lie to me. Looking at your proficiency in wielding the sword and your movements, it's clear that you've gone through several years of training to be able to have such accomplishments. Tell me honestly, who taught you? Under the other party's intense gaze, Zhang Yan's expression did not change. He calmly replied, I've been in the upper house for less than a year, and it's only been a month since I broke through the second tier of clear chi. A few days ago, I was on a diplomatic mission to the water country, and I've only returned to the upper house today. How do you explain the several years of training? Actually, what Elder Chen said about the several years of training was very accurate. It was impossible for a flying sword practitioner to put all his energy into practicing the sword in a year, unlike Zhang Yan who had spent 200 days in the broken jade to train. Therefore, the several years of training was worth it. Less than a year in the upper house. Elder Chen's frown deepened. He had been in seclusion for many years, and it was only recently that he came out to teach the sword technique at the request of Elder Sun. He had only seen Feng Ming today, so naturally, he would not know about Zhang Yan's matter. Moreover, no one would mention such a trivial matter in front of them. He asked, What's your name? Whose disciple are you? Do you have a position? Zhang Yan's expression turned serious. He straightened his body and replied, I'm Zhang Yan. I'm the supervisor of the Danding School, and my master is the headmaster of the Danding School. Elder Chen was stunned. He's actually Uncle Zhou's disciple. He thought to himself, no wonder this person was so rude just now. So he's of the same generation as me. There's nothing wrong with this. Then he turned his head to look at Feng Ming, feeling awkward. Originally, he had promised his elder son that he would give the star's sword orb to Feng Ming. Who knew that Zhang Yan would interfere and was even more skilled in controlling the star's sword orb? In front of tens of thousands of disciples, he couldn't act rashly or shamelessly. Therefore, when he called Zhang Yan over, he wanted to pressure him with words and make him withdraw voluntarily. However, after knowing that he was Zhou Chengju's disciple, he gave up on this idea. Zhou Chengju's status in the sect was special, and his seniority was high. Usually, other than the sect leader, he didn't give face to anyone. Moreover, he was a famous alchemy grandmaster in the Donghua continent. His words might have some effect on other disciples, but it was completely useless against Zhang Yan, because he couldn't control him. Although he was also an elder, it was only because of his cultivation and seniority, so he only had a title. He couldn't be compared to those elders in the Hall of Duzhen who were called by their Dharma names. Just as he was in a dilemma, he felt a slight vibration under his feet. His face couldn't help but become slightly happy. He looked up at the sky and said with a smile, Is it senior brother Sun? Not long after, a dot of red light appeared in the sky, followed by a bright red flame descending from the sky. Then, the flame exploded and disappeared, revealing a tall and burly cultivator with a full beard. This person walked over with a terrifying aura. Every step he took was soul-stirring, causing the earth to shake and the mountains to shake. Zhang Yan was secretly shocked. Body following the wind and fire, movement like a mountain, breath like clouds. This is clearly the second level of the core transformation realm, the core aura leakage. Before this cultivator even got close, he laughed boldly and said, So it's Uncle Master Zhou's disciple. You're indeed a young hero. Since that's the case, as an elder, I can't be stingy. He strode towards Zhang Yan, and before he got close, he felt a wave of heat hitting his face. This cultivator stopped in front of Zhang Yan, and he was half a head taller than the latter. He stared at him and said, Junior brother Zhang, when I was playing with the wind and fire in the sky, I saw you circulating your spiritual vigor for a total of 48 times. Just now, you defeated Feng Ming. Presumably, like Feng Ming, you also have 49 mouthfuls of spiritual vigor in your chest. You can be considered as outstanding. But if the enemy is a little stronger, what will you do? Without waiting for Zhang Yan to speak, he pointed at his chest and said, I have an incantation here, it's called Out of Nothing, and it's one of the secrets of the Zhenyuan sword scripture. It can allow you to have 3 more cycles when your spiritual vigor is exhausted. Since you want this sword pill, I can't separate this incantation from your swordsmanship. But I want to test your temperament, and I'm not limiting your methods. If you can find 1,000 inkstone fish before sunrise, I'll pass this incantation along with the star's sword pill to you. If not, then you're not fated with this swordsmanship, and naturally, I can't give this sword pill to you. What do you think? The inkstone fish was a specialty of the Great Pool of Dragon Lake. Not only could the fish's eggs be used in pills, but they were also top-notch delicacies. After cooking them carefully, even a cultivator would find it hard to resist the temptation. Zhou Chengju's fishing boat was an inkstone fish that had lived for 3,000 years. It was just that this fish had a membrane under its abdomen, and after cultivating for a long time, it could even grow a pair of wings. Its speed in the water was unparalleled, and its skin was coarse and thick. Its scales were thick and hard, and it was sly by nature. It loved to swim in deep water, so it was very difficult to catch. Although there was still more than half a day before sunrise, it was difficult to catch 1,000 inkstone fish. Not to mention 1,000, even if a person was unlucky, they might not be able to catch 10. Zhang Yan laughed coldly in his heart. They were clearly not willing to let him have the star's sword pill, so they came up with such an excuse. As an elder, they were so shameless and set up so many obstacles just to give the sword pill to Feng Ming. They even called it a test of his temperament, but in reality, they wanted him to give up on this idea. But did they think that I would back off just because of this? He immediately agreed without hesitation, saying, if that's the case, please wait here patiently, I'll be right back. The 2 elders couldn't help but be surprised when they saw him agree so quickly, and they glanced at each other. Elder Sun's eyes narrowed as he smiled, and he waved his hand. Go on, us 2 brothers will wait here. Whether you succeed or not will depend on your fortune. Zhang Yan didn't say anything more. He flew out of the flying ship and flew away. However, he didn't go to find the inkstone puppet. Instead, he went straight back to Spirit Page Island. As soon as the restriction was opened, Luo Xiao came out to greet him. She bowed and said, Master has returned. Zhang Yan looked around and saw a group of beautiful fish demons swimming in the water, creating ripples in the water. Originally, they could only swim within a 5-kilometer radius of the Spirit Page Island's waters when the restriction wasn't opened. But now, they were truly fish in water. However, at this moment, Zhang Yan couldn't let them rest. He shouted and gathered them together. Then, he told them his intention. With a single order, the hundreds of fish demons responded in unison and swam towards the depths of the water. The strongmen living on the shore immediately found a dozen bamboo baskets that were as tall as a person from the utensils they brought from Red Cloud Island and placed them on the shore. Zhang Yan nodded. With a flick of his sleeve, everyone was rewarded with pills. Now that he was the supervisor of the Dan Ding Institute and Zhou Chengju didn't restrict him in this aspect, he naturally didn't lack pills. He casually distributed a lot of good stuff. After the strong men moved to the island, they hadn't seen him much. Now that they saw that he was even more generous than Wang Pan, they couldn't help but feel that they had followed the right person. They all knelt down and paid their respects. More than 2 hours later, the fish demons and beauties returned one after another. Each of them had an impermeable and delicate pouch by their side. 1 or 2 lively inkstone carps were poured out from each pouch, but it was still far from 1,000. Zhang Xian said, the people of the Water Nation claim that the fish demons are especially good at catching fish and can dive deep into the sea. Could the rumor be wrong? The fish demons were all good at reading people's expressions. At this moment, when they saw Zhang Yan's expression, they didn't dare to say much. They hurriedly threw down the inkstone carps and dove back into the water. However, one of them was rather bold. She popped her head out and said, "Don't worry, master. We are still not familiar with the habits of these inkstone carps. That's why we don't have enough now. Give me another 2 hours and it won't be hard to gather them all." However, Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It's fine. Even if it's not enough, I won't blame you. Just do your best." He was strong-willed. Although external objects were helpful to cultivation, he would be happy if he had them, but he would be calm if he didn't have them. Even if he couldn't get the sword pellet today, he wouldn't be sad about it. However, after hearing this, the fish demons were all excited, as if there was a burden in their hearts. They redoubled their efforts. Among the water tribe, they were the most emotional. They were often sad because of sorrow, so their lifespans weren't long. Another 2 hours later, when the fish demons rushed back again, this time everyone poured out their pouches. There were 7 or 8 inkstone carps, and some had more than a dozen. In addition to the ones they had caught before, the number was close to 2,000. It was far beyond Zhang Yan's expectations. He couldn't help but feel very satisfied. He didn't hesitate to reward them. With a wave of his sleeve, a large number of pills were scattered. He asked the fish demon who had popped her head out just now, "What's your name?" The fish demon answered obediently, "My name is Shang Shang." Zhang Yan nodded, and with a flick of his finger, a pill landed in her hand. "This form transformation pill is for you. It will help you shed your fins and scales, so you can enjoy a human body." Shang Shang was stunned at first, and then she looked at Zhang Yan in a daze. 2 lines of tears fell down her cheeks. She thought she would be a slave for the rest of her life, and she would never be free. But now, she suddenly saw hope. Not only could she shed half of her fish body, but she could also transform into a human and come ashore. There was hope for her to achieve Tao. She couldn't help but be moved, and she raised her head to sing. She sang happily first, and when they felt the joy in her voice, the 100 or so fish demons also sang together. For a moment, it was like a moving music lingering on Spirit Page Island. Luo Xiao sighed and said, "Master, the singing of Yu Ji can make a person with a heart of stone lower his head and shed tears, make a person who has committed a heinous crime feel remorse, and cheer up a person who has no way out. It's rare to hear." Zhang Yan nodded in agreement and said, "It's indeed pleasing to the ear. It's rare in the world." However, he didn't know that a person was flying in the sky 1,000 feet above them. When he heard the voice, he couldn't help but frown and snort coldly, obscene and evil song, bewitching people's hearts. Where did such a monster come from in the hinterland of my Yutsang sect? Chapter 68. I've been suppressing the devil's cave outside and haven't returned to the sect for 16 years. Why is it that I'm greeted by such filthy air as soon as I return? It looks like I'll have to meet the sect master and raise the morale of the younger generation of disciples. A cultivator with a strange appearance and a pair of pupils floated in the air 1,000 feet above the ground, looking down. He wore a purple-gold Taoist robe and held a green bamboo branch in his right hand, leaning against his shoulder. At his feet lay a lazy spirit beast that looked like a cat but wasn't a cat, like a tiger but wasn't a tiger. Its body was covered in gorgeous gold and red stripes. He looked at it a few more times and committed Zhang Yan's appearance to memory before flying away. On Spirit Page Island, Zhang Yan waved his hand and the 12 bamboo baskets containing the inkstone chi flew into the air and onto the flying boat. After gathering Meiji back, he flew into the air and closed the restriction before driving the flying boat back to Yingluo Island at full speed. In less than 2 hours, the huge bluestone screen wall came into view. However, after a few glances, he discovered that the island was already empty. The disciples who had been sitting and listening to the Tao had all been dismissed, leaving only the 2 elders and the accompanying Taoist children. A meaningful smile appeared on Zhang Yan's face. No wonder the two of them had sent him away. It turned out that they had this plan. Although he had defeated Feng Ming on the spot, he hadn't confirmed the ownership of the Star Sword Orb. Moreover, he had hurriedly gone to capture the Inkstone Chi after exchanging a few words with Elder Chen and Elder Sun, so no one knew what the outcome was. Naturally, he could minimize the negative effects of this matter on Feng Ming. As for the disciples wandering around in the future, if it was Zhang Yan himself, he only needed to give Feng Ming another sword orb and find an opportunity to display it in front of everyone. That way, no one would look down on him. Seeing that Zhang Yan had returned so quickly, Elder Sun and Elder Chen on the stone platform looked at each other, a hint of surprise in their eyes. Originally, they wanted to make things difficult for Zhang Yan. Now, it seemed that they had really succeeded. Zhang Yan controlled the flying boat to slowly descend from the sky. Before it reached the ground, he pushed out his sleeve, and a burst of spiritual energy surged out, overturning the 12 bamboo baskets. Over 1,000 lively inkstone pythons instantly fell from the sky, splashing onto the stone platform in front of the two elders like rain. At the same time, he said in a clear voice, "Elder Sun, is the number correct?" Elder Sun laughed loudly, his vigorous laughter resounding through the clouds. His tall and sturdy body flashed as he stood up and said, "We can't miss such a delicacy." He raised his neck and opened his mouth, creating a huge white tornado out of thin air. Before those inkstone pythons could even land on the ground, they were sucked in. There seemed to be countless tiny cyan cyclones swirling and dancing in the tornado, and there were even fiery red sparks swimming around. The inkstone pythons only spun once in the tornado before all the scales on their bodies were peeled off. After another spin, the white and tender flesh of the fish sizzled, as if there was an invisible flame continuously roasting it. In an instant, it turned into a golden color, giving off a wonderful fragrance. When it came to the third spin, the flesh of the fish was actually separated from the bones, before finally being tossed into Elder Sun's seemingly bottomless mouth. When the sky-encompassing fish feast ended, a tall pile of fish bones was piled up under Elder Sun's feet. Every fish bone was in perfect condition, and there was not the slightest bit of minced meat left on them. Even the smallest parts were pure white and exquisite, shining like crystals, as if they had been polished by the most meticulous craftsman. There was only the thick fragrance of roasted fish left in the air. Zhang Yan understood that this was Elder Sun showing him his control over core fiendish qi, and also secretly giving him a warning, telling him not to overstep his boundaries. However, he did not care. On the path of cultivation, he would fight when he had to, and take when he had to. As long as he did not break the rules of the sect, and followed the rules that were laid out in the open, no one could find fault with him, and there was nothing they could do to him. At this moment, the flying boat landed on the ground, and Zhang Yan stepped out. He raised his hands in a salute and said, "Elder Sun, I wonder if the number of inkstone pythons is correct?" Elder Sun laughed and said, "There are a total of 1,859. Not only is the number correct, it's even more than that. Zhang Yan, I've still underestimated you. If that's the case." He turned around and said with a smile, "Junior brother Chen, what belongs to him will belong to him, and what doesn't belong to him will not be taken away." Elder Chen coughed and said, "Zhang Yan, this is your opportunity. Keep this star's sword sphere well, and I hope you know what to do." With a flick of his finger, a speck of blue light flew out. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand to catch it, and felt a cool object fall into his palm. He opened his palm to take a look, and found that this sword sphere was the size of a fist. It was surrounded by spiritual qi, and there were stardust revolving around it. Carefully feeling it, he found that it was full of vitality, and there seemed to be the sound of breathing. It was a water element sword sphere. He nodded and put it into his sleeve, preparing to go back and refine it. Elder Sun took out a jade scroll from his sleeve and tossed it to Zhang Yan as well, saying, "This is the technique of creating something from nothing. Destroy it after you look at it, and do not teach it to others. Otherwise, the sect rules will not forgive you." At the end of his sentence, his voice was like thunder, shaking the entire island to the point that the grass and trees on it rustled, and his power was extremely ferocious. Zhang Yan, on the other hand, was calm and unmoved. He clasped his hands together and said, "Zhang Yan understands. Elders, I'll take my leave." As soon as he finished speaking, he took a step forward, and a cloud appeared and lifted him up, and he floated away. Elder Sun's eyes widened, and he said in surprise, "Riding on the cloud? This Zhang Yan is only at the second level of clear qi, and he can already do this. Could it be that he cultivates junior nephew Sun's hidden book of waves clouds?" Elder Chen frowned as well, and he tugged at his beard as he said, "Could it be that this kid is a hidden pawn that junior nephew Sun set up? Why have I never heard him mention this?" Elder Sun shook his head and said, I don't understand. However, this Zhang Yan revealed his ability today, and it tells us that he isn't without foundation. Never mind, I originally intended to find an opportunity to temper him, but now it would seem like I should forget about it, so as to avoid spoiling Marshal Nephew Sun's plans and taking it out on us like he did the last time. Elder Chen sighed. Alas, only 4 of the 10 great disciples in the sect belong to the same line as us, yet we're still on guard against each other here and can't unite as a group. How would we go against the clans? There's another 2 years before the sect competition, and if we're unable to foster a few capable disciples, then we'll sooner or later be suppressed by the clans and be unable to rise again. Elder Sun nodded, and then he seemed to have thought of something and slapped himself on the head as he said, I heard that Zhuangbu Fan will be returning to the sect soon. With him holding down the fort, he'll surely be able to suppress the arrogance of all the disciples of the clans. Oh. Elder Chen's eyes lit up, and he stroked his beard as he said, Marshal Nephew Zhuang is returning to the sect? Good. In this way, our line of master and disciple will have a greater chance of winning the competition 2 years from now, and if we foster a few capable disciples, then it won't be impossible for us to suppress the clans. Elder Sun nodded, and then he withdrew an object from his sleeve and said, we have to deal with Feng Ming properly, so as to prevent him from forming an inner demon. That would be bad. Since my eldest brother has already refined a star sword orb for me, then the sword orb I used earlier is useless. Why don't you pass it to him on my behalf so that he can cultivate in peace and have fewer distracting thoughts? His natural talent is superb, and if he's able to live up to my expectations, then he'll surely be able to fight for a place in the competition. Actually, this was an action that had no other choice. Feng Ming was one of the disciples that they all thought highly of, and they intended to support. It would be fine if he didn't live up to expectations, but it just so happened that it wasn't his fault this time, and if there was a fault, then it was related to their arrangements. Elder Chen stretched out his hand to receive the sword orb, and he muttered, I noticed that he was depressed when he left, and there was a knot in his heart. Seeing your brother's good intentions, I hope he can understand it. Elder Sun laughed heartily and said, Fate is determined by the heavens, and the great Tao is determined by the heart. If he can't even overcome this obstacle, how will he be able to compete with the disciples of the clans in the future? This change will allow us to see exactly what his temperament is like, and whether he's worthy of the praise of the elders. Elder Chen nodded in agreement, that's right. Zhang Yan returned to Spirit Page Island, and after returning to his cave abode, he deactivated the island's restrictions. When he saw Luo Xiao walking in, he took out the sword orb in his hand and showed it to her, asking her to appraise it. When Luo Xiao saw the sword orb, her beautiful eyes lit up, and she held it in her hand to take a few more glances. She praised, Congratulations, old master. Not only is this sword orb filled with spiritual qi, it also contains a trace of spirituality. Only a Yuaniing expert can refine it, and its quality is superb. What's more precious is that it's still an unpolished piece of unpolished gold. If you refine it with your blood essence, and then place it in your chest to nourish, it will be able to improve along with your cultivation. If you can nurture spirituality and give birth to a sword spirit, it will become a transcendent artifact with infinite power. However, Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled, Sword spirit? It's easier said than done. It can be called a profound artifact. My star's sword orb can at most be called a transcendent artifact. In my opinion, even if I use a nurturing technique to strengthen its spirituality, it will still take 100 years to see results. Transcendent artifacts were also divided into high and low grades. For example, the flying sword and copper spear Zhang Yan had were all transcendent artifacts. When it was activated, it completely depended on the cultivator's cultivation. Without the support of spiritual qi, it would be like an ordinary object. As for the destiny pen, the soul-suppressing inkstone, the gold magnetic copper mirror, the Rui divine shuttle, and the heart-striking hammer, they were all high-grade spirit artifacts. Because they already possessed a bit of intelligence, after being refined with blood essence, one only needed to use a small amount of true essence qi to injure the enemy. Only when a transcendent artifact became a true artifact could it give birth to its own consciousness. At this moment, the transcendent artifact would have a trace of spirituality, and if it could take a step further and become a profound artifact, it would be able to transform into a human. With its own consciousness, it could cultivate and achieve the Tao like a cultivator. Therefore, there were often some transcendent artifacts in the world that had cultivated a Dharma spirit and hid in the deep mountains and great lakes to avoid being captured and refined into slaves by cultivators. He heard that above the true artifact, there was still the mysterious Tao artifact. This was not something he could speculate about. However, it was best to refine the flying sword himself. Only then could his mind and spirit truly be in perfect harmony. It was just that his Xian cultivation had not reached that level yet, he could only use the things refined by others. Zhang Yan held the star's sword orb in his hand and was about to use his blood essence to refine it. However, at this moment, he had a sudden impulse. The qi in his body throbbed, as if there was some force behind him urging them. He couldn't help but smile. The time has come. Today is the day to break through the third realm of clear qi. P.S. My elders went to celebrate the birthday and I came back late. Sorry. Chapter 69. Zhang Yan originally wanted to refine the sword ball, but he didn't expect that at this time, the opportunity to break through the third realm was right in front of him. But the closer he got to this step, the more he had to be patient. He couldn't have the slightest bit of impatience. He first ordered Luo Xiao to go out and guard, then closed the door of the cave, collected his mind, and looked inside. Originally, the last breath of spiritual energy was about to merge, but now with the help of the heavens, he took the opportunity to move, and it was even smoother, without any obstruction. At this moment, his mind was clear. These two breaths seemed to be magnified countless times in front of him, every bit of it reflected in the bottom of his heart. He could see clearly how the two clear and turbid energies contained each other, and how they merged into one. It was just that the fusion of this breath was unexpectedly long. After a whole 5 days and nights, there was a loud bang in his mind. The energy rushed up and down his body. There seemed to be something deep in his body that was linked up. Looking at his chest again, he saw a total of 81 breaths of spiritual energy there connected head to tail, spiraling around. Before he had time to take a closer look, all the spiritual energy suddenly shook, rising up, and overflowed from his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose, then floated in the air above his head, forming a chaotic cloud the size of an acre, wriggling and rolling. He could feel that this cloud was desperately swallowing all the spiritual energy between heaven and earth, constantly strengthening itself. At this moment, whether it was the metal wind raging fire, the underground heavy evil, or the mountain water vapor, the forest's vitality, they were all sucked in, gathered in one place, and became a part of it. With the passage of time, the cloud also gradually changed. From its original thin state, it became thick and viscous, and there were faint signs of transformation. At this time, Zhang Yan only heard a rumbling sound in his ears, as if a clap of thunder had come out of nowhere. Drops of solid raindrops fell from the clouds, and when these raindrops came into contact with his body, they seeped into his pores. However, even more of them poured directly into his body from the top of his head, and then slowly sank into his dantian aperture. Zhang Yan understood. This step was called opening the gate of heaven. From then on, the energy in the chest would connect with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and without the metal wind and raging fire, it could be directly refined into turbid spiritual energy. Even if the majority of the 81 breaths of spiritual energy were used up in battle, as long as there was one breath left in the chest, there was no need to start from the beginning. He only needed to absorb a little bit of spiritual energy from heaven and earth, and in a very short period of time, he would be able to cultivate again. However, once the gate of heaven was opened, there would be all kinds of impurities. These impurities were not only brought in from the outside world after the gate of heaven was opened, but there were also impurities in the cultivator's body. If the cultivator did not have the help of medicinal pills, one wrong adjustment would cause the impurities to mix with the spiritual aura, causing the chi dynamic to be impure, which would become an obstacle for the cultivator in the future. Zhang Yan did not dare to hesitate. Immediately the Wang Pan, the dragon life Dan from his sleeve, and Dantian, he took it to swallow. This dragon life Dan was not easy to refine. Even the Danding Pavilion already had a fixed number. If not for the fact that Zhang Yan had obtained Wang Pan's Dan first, he would have to wait until next year to be able to get his share. As soon as the Dan entered his stomach, it immediately suppressed the evil energy, and with a turn of the energy, the impurities also seemed to be brushed away by something, and then were completely expelled from the body through his pores. After the spiritual energy had circulated 81 times, even the meridians in the body had been cleansed. The medicinal power of the dragon life Dan had also been completely used up. At this time, Zhang Yan felt his breathing become clear, as if a large stone had been lifted from his chest, and his mind felt at ease. He understood that he had officially stepped into the third level of bright chi, the realm of heaven's rain descending. However, at this moment, his back was sticky, and he felt very uncomfortable. It was the impurities and filth that had been expelled from his body. He stood up and jumped into the hot spring in the cave, slowly washing away the filth on his body. Looking at the steaming mist, he pondered, although I have already reached the third level of bright chi, compared to the cultivators who have condensed the mysterious seed of light, I am still a level lower. There are still 2 years before the sect competition, when the disciples of the various schools and peaks will gather. There will be no lack of outstanding disciples. I must not slack off at this time. After reaching the third level of bright chi, if one did not condense the mysterious seed of light, it would be useless to cultivate, and one's cultivation would not advance even a little bit. And to condense the mysterious seed of light, one must first put a cloud sandstone into one's chi sea. The cloud sandstone was a level higher than the 5 elements divine sand. It was a stone formed from the 5 elements divine sand after tens of thousands of years of evolution in a place with abundant spiritual energy. In the great pool of Dragon Lake, there were dozens of such spiritual lands, and disciples at the third level of bright chi could enter and search for them. Zhang Yan thought, these dozens of spiritual lands, I wonder which one is the best. Senior brother Zhou has been in the sect for hundreds of years, he must know a thing or two, why don't I go ask him? After washing away all the filth on his body, he felt refreshed. He got up and changed into the dazzling Taoist robe given to him by the king of the water country, walked out of the cave, and said a few words to Luo Shao, released the flying boat, and flew towards the Danding courtyard. Now that he was familiar with the way, it did not take long for him to float across the vast lake, fly over the roofs of the halls of the Danding courtyard, and land on the fishing boat. After notifying the deacon at the door, he entered the pavilion, and saw Zhou Changju standing in front of the window with his hands behind his back, sighing, Junior brother Zhang, it has not been a year since you entered the sect, and you have already reached the third level of bright chi, you are indeed a genius. Senior's discerning eyes are not wrong, there is hope for us to take revenge in the future. He turned around, and said with a smile, I also knew that you would come to me in a few days, do you want to ask about the seed of mysterious light? Zhang Yan was slightly surprised, and said, Senior brother is right, junior brother is here for this matter. Zhou Changju chuckled and said, according to the rules of the sect, this cloud sand is supposed to be found for me by senior, but I don't have it. However, I do know 2 places. Zhang Yan cupped his hands, and said, Senior brother, please do not hesitate to tell me. Zhou Changju's robe swayed, and he sat in front of the table, stroked his beard, and said, "Oh, the first place is the sect's spiritual mechanism courtyard. As a direct disciple, you do not need to search for the cloud sand yourself like ordinary disciples, you only need to collect one from there. It is just that the cloud sand in the spiritual mechanism courtyard is also collected by some disciples, and even if it is difficult to find one or two of excellent quality, it has long been picked by others. Although the ones left are useful, they are much worse than the high-quality cloud sand, and it only saves a lot of effort to find them." Zhang Yan smiled lightly, and said, "Although this method saves effort, in the future there will be shortcomings. I wonder what is the other place." The Tai Golden Book that he cultivated was a superior Xian technique, and the more such a technique, the more stringent the requirements for cultivation. If it was ordinary cloud sand, he was afraid that in the future, the power would be greatly reduced, so this method was not advisable. Zhou Chengju seemed to have already known his attitude, and he was not surprised, and said, "The other place is rather dangerous, it depends on whether junior brother dares to go or not." Zhang Yan did not even think, and immediately said, "The road of Tao has always been filled with obstacles, how can there be a reason to avoid difficulties? Senior brother, there is no harm in saying." Zhou Chengju slammed the table, stood up, and said, "Good. You go out of the Dark Azure Sect's mountain gate, and all the way north, there is a boundary called the Heavenly Lake of Xiaoyu, and you will find what you want 100 feet under the water." Heavenly Lake of Xiaoyu? Zhang Yan was slightly surprised, and said, "Isn't that the boundary of Guai Songyao of the Three Lakes Demons?" The Three Lakes was just a general name, but there were actually three places, namely the Jade Blood Pool, the Surging Waves Lake, and the last one was this Heavenly Lake of Xiaoyu. Guai Songyao was an old turtle that had lived for thousands of years, and he had the highest cultivation among the three great demon lords, so it would be extremely dangerous to take something from under his nose. Zhou Chengju said in a low voice, "Although this demon is also one of the three demons, Guai Songyao has always been a loner, and he does not have many disciples, and he is fond of sleeping, so as long as you do not disturb him when you take the cloud sand, it will be fine. As for how you want to decide, think about it carefully." Zhang Yan thought for a while, and with a plan in mind, he did not say anything more, and left. After walking out of the door, he smiled slightly. Although Zhou Chengju described this matter as extremely dangerous, but if he was not wrong, there should be some hidden meaning behind it. He immediately took the flying boat and returned to Spirit Page Island, passing through the halls and courtyards, and before he left the Dan Ding courtyard, when he passed by the Virtue's Sandalwood Pavilion, he heard a voice that sounded familiar. His heart skipped a beat, and he pressed the cloud head down, landing in the courtyard. The last time Zhang Yan came here, he had captured all the disciples of the 6 rivers and 4 islands, so all the deacons and children in the surroundings recognized him, and they all rushed over to greet him, saying, "Martial Uncle Zhang is here." At this moment, in the Virtue's Sandalwood Pavilion, a woman said angrily, "Obviously, 100 spirit shells can be exchanged for 10 major elemental pills, why are there only 5 now?" Pavilion Master Chow said slowly, "The original price was correct, but major elemental pills have always been difficult to refine, and the sex competition is approaching. All the courtyards and peaks are doing their best to nurture the younger generation of disciples, so the number of major elemental pills has been decreasing recently. If you do not want it, there will naturally be other disciples who will take it, so I advise you to exchange it now. If you wait a few more days, I am afraid it will not be this number again." Qin Nan, who was standing beside the woman, pulled on her sleeve and advised, "Senior Marshal Sister Wang, why don't you just buy 5? "No." The woman pulled out her sleeve and slammed the cabinet, saying angrily, "Do you know that I am old friends with Qing Dalong of the 6 rivers and 4 islands? Do you trust me to call him here?" Pavilion Master Chow laughed coldly and said, "Even if the true disciples of the 6 rivers and 4 islands come personally, they still have to follow the rules of the Danding Pavilion." In his heart, he thought, "Do you think it is still the time when Doming was still around? Now there is no need to care about your faces." The woman had previously boasted in front of Qin Nan, but now she was unable to back down. Her face immediately turned red, and she pulled Qin Nan back, saying angrily, "Junior Marshal sister, let's go. I will go call Ching Dalong here myself. Let's see if he still dares to bully me." Pavilion Master Chow's face revealed a mocking expression, and he was about to say a few more words when he suddenly heard a commotion outside. Listening carefully, he quivered and immediately put on a smiling face. He hurriedly ran out, bowed, and said, "So, Marshal Uncle Zhang has arrived. Marshal nephew, please forgive me for not going out to meet you." Chapter 70. Pavilion Master Chow's tone carried a hint of flattery, and he was even more respectful than when Zhang Yan had come last time. In the Pill Cauldron Institute, Zhou Chengju loved to write and refine medicine, so he did not care about anything else. As a result, the two vice-chancellors usually had the final say in the institute. However, the two vice-chancellors had very different personalities. Vice-Chancellor Gu only cared about the medicine fields and did not have many thoughts. Aside from himself, he did not care about anyone else. On the other hand, Dou Ming was different. He was too selfish. In order for a few of his clansmen to enter the Yutsang sect, he had blindly curried favor with a few aristocratic clans, even offering them rare medicinal pills. He was also ruthless with his subordinates. Now that he had gone, Pavilion Master Chow felt as if he had seen the sun again. Zhang Yan stepped through the door and nodded at Pavilion Master Chow, then looked around. Qin Nan originally thought that Pavilion Master Chow had hurriedly gone to greet some senior, but when she saw Zhang Yan, she could not help but be pleasantly surprised. "Senior apprentice brother, why are you here?" Zhang Yan smiled and nodded. "What a coincidence. Junior apprentice sister Qin, are you here to exchange for medicinal pills?" Qin Nan nodded vigorously and pulled the woman beside her. "Yes, I'm here with senior apprentice sister Wang to exchange for some major primal pills." "Did you manage to exchange them?" Qin Nan shook her head. "I didn't bring enough spirit shells, so I couldn't afford to exchange them." Beside her, senior apprentice sister Wang glanced at Zhang Yan. Seeing that he seemed to have a high status, she did not know the relationship between the two. She wanted to speak, but she did not dare to be rash. Pavilion Master Chow's heart skipped a beat. His mind was active, and without waiting for Qin Nan to speak, he immediately asked the steward beside him, "Did the medicine garden deliver another batch of major primal pills recently?" The steward was used to seeing colors, so how could he not understand what he meant? He immediately replied, "Yes, Pavilion Master Gu just ordered someone to deliver them, but they have not been recorded yet." Pavilion Master Chow said, "Go get 100 major primal pills and give them to these two fellow Taoists." The steward understood and hurriedly entered the pill storeroom. He deftly took out 5 porcelain bottles from a drawer and handed them to Qin Nan. Qin Nan opened her eyes wide and said, "I only have 100 spirit shells on hand. I'm afraid that is not enough to exchange for so many major primal pills." Pavilion Master Chow sneaked a glance at Zhang Yan and saw that his expression was indifferent, as if he didn't say anything. Pavilion Master Chow coughed and stood up. "That's right. 100 spirit shells in exchange for 100 medicinal pills. Fellow Taoist, just keep it." For alchemists of their level, apart from handing over the pills they refined to the sect, the rest were kept for themselves. Thus, they had a bit of status in the sect. From Pavilion Master Chow's point of view, this Zhang Yan was a direct disciple of Zhou Chengju, and he also held the position of supervisor in the sect, so he could find fault with Pavilion Master Chow at any time. How could he not flatter Pavilion Master Chow when he became the minister? In the past, when Dou Ming was still alive, most of the medicinal pills were swallowed by him and put into his own pockets to curry favor with the disciples of the noble clans. Now that he was dead, the pockets of the alchemists under him had become rich again. A mere 50 major primal pills to befriend Zhang Yan was really too worth it. However, Qin Nan didn't know what to do. After all, she was only a 15 or 16-year-old girl. She didn't know if she could accept it, so she looked at Senior Marshal Sister Wang for help. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Junior Marshal Sister Qin, since Pavilion Master Chao is right, then you should accept it. That's right, Senior Marshal Sister Wang said anxiously and quickly stuffed the 100 spirit shells into the steward's hands, as if she was afraid that he would go back on his word. Qin Nan was also smart. When she heard the two of them say this, she understood that she had gotten a bargain. She stuck out her tongue and happily put away the 5 bottles of major primal pills. Zhang Yan thought highly of Qin Nan's talent and felt that she would definitely shine brightly in the future. Thus, he didn't mind helping her at this time. Seeing that this matter was over, he walked out of the courtyard with the two of them. Pavilion Master Chao hurriedly respectfully sent them off. When they were outside, Senior Marshal Sister Wang immediately saw the flying boat in the courtyard. Her eyes lit up and she asked in a charming voice, Does this flying boat belong to Senior Marshal Brother Zhang? Zhang Yan said, Yes. Senior Marshal Sister Wang couldn't help but look at Zhang Yan a few more times and thought to herself, this Senior Marshal brother actually has a flying boat and seems to have quite a high status in Danding Courtyard. Could he be a disciple of some noble clan? There was a rule in Yutsang sect that once a cultivator reached clear chi tier, they could all ride a flying boat. However, this wasn't something that all cultivators could do. A flying boat consumed a lot of materials. Unless one was from a profound sect noble clan or an elite disciple of a master and disciple lineage, they wouldn't be able to use it. For example, Wang Pan's 9 flying boats all belonged to him. The other clansmen who cultivated with him didn't get a share. Seeing that the two of them didn't seem to have a flying boat, Zhang Yan said courteously, Where are the two of you going? Do you need me to give you a ride? Senior Marshal Sister Wang sighed and said, To be honest, Senior Marshal brother, we're going to the Little Luo Sea to meet up with our Senior Marshal brothers and sisters. Master will bring us to the Ci True Palace to cultivate. The ferry ride will take us 7 days and 7 nights. The Yutsang sect's grand competition was imminent. Every cave abode and spiritual mountain was urging their disciples to do their best to improve their cultivation. Therefore, some of the superior cave abodes were also open to their disciples. Shi and Qin Nan were going to the patriarch's place to cultivate. However, Qin Nan felt embarrassed and whispered, Let's not trouble Senior Marshal Brother Zhang. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, Fine. Junior Marshal Sister Qin and I hit it off. I'll help you this once. He took out a flying boat from his sleeve and stuffed the token into Qin Nan's hand. He said, Junior Marshal Sister Qin, I'll borrow this flying boat. I'll come back for it when I'm free in the future. Without waiting for Qin Nan's reply, he boarded the flying boat and soared into the sky, disappearing in a short while. Senior Marshal Sister Wang nudged the dazed Qin Nan and whispered, Junior Marshal Sister Qin, where did you meet this Senior Marshal Brother Zhang? Qin Nan said, This Senior Marshal brother. I met him in front of the blue stone illuminating wall. Oh right, this Senior Marshal Brother Zhang is so powerful. It seems that even Senior Marshal Brother Feng wasn't his match that day. Senior Marshal Sister Wang's eyes widened. Senior Marshal Brother Feng lost to this person. Qin Nan nodded and fiddled with the token in her hand. With a final wave, the flying boat enlarged in front of her in the blink of an eye. She couldn't help but feel overjoyed and jumped onto the flying boat. She waved her hand and said, Senior Marshal Sister, come quickly. With this flying boat, we'll be able to reach the vast sea earlier and surprise our Senior Marshal brothers and sisters. After Senior Sister Wang boarded, Qin Nan activated the talisman and the flying boat slowly floated up from the ground. Not long after, it arrived in the clouds and paused for a moment before flying towards its destination like a bolt of lightning. After a while, Senior Marshal Sister Wang looked at Qin Nan who was excitedly operating the flying boat. She took a few steps forward and casually asked, Junior Marshal Sister, what's this Senior Marshal brother's name? I'll have to thank him when I meet him in the future. Qin Nan shook her head and said, Junior Marshal Sister doesn't know. This Senior Marshal brother's surname is Zhang. I only found out today just now. Senior Marshal Sister Wang pursed her lips but didn't believe it. She only thought that Qin Nan didn't want to tell her. She then looked at the cloud-ascending flying boat and felt both jealous and envious. Qing Dalong usually looked imposing and spoke generously, but he didn't have such extravagance. A flying boat was lent out just like that. It looked like that senior marshal brother Zhang didn't want to ask for it back. Who would have thought that this Lil miss, who usually didn't show herself, would have such a helper in the sect? She couldn't underestimate her in the future. Not caring about the thoughts of these two people, Zhang Yan returned to Spirit Page Island. Since he was going to the clear nether heavenly lake, no matter what mysteries there were, he had to be completely prepared. He closed the cave dwelling and picked up the star. He bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a drop of blood essence on it. Then, he silently formed a spell and slowly refined it according to the method recorded in the sword manual. He used a total of 16 days to successfully refine it. At this moment, this sword pill was connected to his heart. Even if it was several miles away, he could fly over with a casual wave of his hand. However, he still couldn't use its full power. If he could condense the profound light seed, he could use this sword to fly, and it would be much faster than the flying boat. When he thought of this, his desire to find the cloud sand became even more urgent. Carrying all the talismans on him, he ordered Luo Xiao to transform into a small snake and hide in his sleeve. He then left the cave dwelling, got on the flying boat, and flew north. Several hours later, a winding mountain ridge appeared in front of him on a plain. This place was called Little Wave Mountain. After passing this mountain and traveling another 100 miles, he would be in the territory of Clear Nether Mountain. However, at this moment, he glanced over and saw that about a mile away, there was also a flying boat flying through the clouds. There were about 5 or 6 people pointing at it. Looking closely, he found to his surprise that Feng Ming, who had competed in the sword at the Bluestone Reflection Wall that day, was also among them. The people on the flying boat were also looking over. When Feng Ming saw Zhang Yan, his expression changed slightly and he turned his head away. One of the people at the front said, "Junior Marshal Brother Feng, do you recognize the Senior Marshal Brother on the other side?" Hearing this person's question, Feng Ming didn't dare to not answer and said, "Senior Marshal Brother Feng, this person is Zhang Yan, the person who defeated me that day at the Bluestone Reflection Wall." "Oh, that person is Zhang Yan, a direct disciple?" When Senior Marshal Brother Feng heard this, he couldn't help but become interested. He turned his head and swept his gaze over Zhang Yan's face a few times. His gaze also suddenly became a bit sharper. After looking, he smiled slightly and said, "I see that this Zhang Yan, other than the fact that his cultivation is a bit unfathomable and he seems to have some knack, there's nothing special about him." However, he was able to comprehend the sword manual in 10 days and beat Junior Marshal Brother. If there's a chance, I'd like to properly experience it. However, Feng Ming shook his head and said, "That day, Elder Qin said not to provoke this Zhang Yan. Also, this person is a disciple of the Academy head Zhou, so his identity is a bit special. His seniority is also higher than ours, so if we can avoid him, it's best not to." Senior Marshal Brother Feng thought for a moment and said, "That's true. However, after I retrieve the skin of that loach, I'll be able to gather 15 small merits and receive an immortal position in the merit courtyard. At that time, even if I meet the elders in the sect, I won't have to follow so many rules." Feng Ming looked at Zhang Yan a few more times and said, "Looking at this Zhang Yan, it seems like he's also going to Little Wave Mountain. Could it be that he's also going there to get a share of the pie?" Senior Marshal Brother Feng didn't care at all and said, "It's not strange. That demonic dragon's transformation failed and its strength was greatly reduced. After hearing this news, all the fellow Marshal brothers are rushing there, right? What's there to be afraid of? When the time comes, we'll just have to rely on our own methods. Don't tell me that he can use his status as a direct disciple to forcefully snatch it." Chapter 71. Feng Zhen and Feng Mingwei rushed in front, repeatedly activating the talismans. The flying boat broke through the clouds and fog. When they were about to reach Xiaolang Mountain, they suddenly saw a flying boat coming towards them. They had no choice but to stop. On the opposite flying boat stood a cultivator at the second tier of the clear Qi realm. This person cupped his hands towards Fang Zhen and the others and said, "Senior brothers, please stop." Senior brother Fang frowned and said, "Who are you and what do you want?" The cultivator's expression was calm as he said, "My family's Xilang is currently in the Little Waves Mountain clearing out the demonic tribes. To prevent any evildoers from slipping through the net and accidentally injuring your fellow disciples, he ordered me to wait for you here. Once the matter is over, my family's Xilang will naturally meet with you. Clear out the evildoers. Don't try to deceive me. You clearly want to take the demon dragon for yourself." Fang Zhen sneered and said, "Do you know who I am? I am Fang Zhen, a disciple of Taoist Yen from the Glimmering Grotto. How dare you stop me? Get out of the way quickly." There were a total of 9 grottos in the Yingzang sect. Other than Taoist Qin, who was the daughter of the previous sect master and had an extraordinary status, the rest of the grottos were occupied by the master and disciples and the aristocratic families of Xianmen. This Taoist Yen was the second disciple of the sect master and the master of the Glimmering Grotto. When the cultivator heard his name, he couldn't help but show slight surprise, but there was no fear in his eyes. He bowed and said, "I heard that Taoist Yen accepted an outstanding disciple a month ago. So it's senior brother Fang. However, my fourth Lang's surname is Xie. I think senior brother has heard of it." "Surname Xie. Fourth Lang." Fang Zhen's expression changed and he probed, "Is it Xie Zong Yuan from the Yushuan Xie clan?" The cultivator nodded with a smile. "That's right." Fang Zhen's heart shook and he hesitated. The Yushuan Xie clan was ranked second among the 12 major clans of the Yingzang sect. Its power was above the Du clan and second only to the Ruipingzhen clan. Now that the lustrous cloud shell field had officially become the territory of the Yingzang sect, the sect had sent out disciples to begin clearing out the surrounding dozens of large and small demon clan tribes. Not to mention the treasures of these demon clan tribes, just their flesh and blood could be used to refine treasures and pills. It was undoubtedly a big cake. Therefore, many aristocratic families were unwilling to be left behind, and they all sent their juniors and disciples to divide up the profits. Speaking of which, this was also related to Zhang Yan. He had brought back the golden booklet that acknowledged the lustrous cloud shell field as the property of the Yuzhang sect. In addition, the demons of the 3 pools of lake could not act rashly due to the order of the Water Kingdom. This gave the Yuzhang sect an excuse to attack these tribes. Furthermore, Little Wave Mountain was on the path close to the fluorescent cloud shellfish field, so it wasn't strange that there were disciples of the Xia clan here. Fang Zhen also understood in his heart that Xie Zong Yuan wanted to devour the demonic flood dragon for himself, so he used the name of exterminating the demon clan to stop them. Although he was master and disciple, his cultivation hadn't reached the mystic light realm yet, and he had just been accepted by spiritual master Yen. There were dozens of senior martial brothers in the sect, and the competition was intense. How would he dare to offend a giant like the Xie family? Seeing Fang Zhen's hesitant expression, the cultivator smiled. He took out a bottle of pills from his sleeve and tossed it over. Fang Zhen subconsciously grabbed it, glanced at it, and said, "What do you mean by this?" The cultivator said, "Xilang said that if any senior martial brothers from the Grotto Heavens come here, they can give this bottle of jade dust pills to them." "Oh. Jade dust pill." Fang Zhen couldn't help but be moved. The value of the jade dust pill was not small, especially for cultivators who walked the path of qi. It could make their aura purer, and it could also increase their cultivation. Giving this to them was clearly to share some of the benefits with them. He didn't want them to interfere with the matter of the demonic flood dragon. Feng Ming came over and whispered, "Senior martial brother Fang, what should we do?" Fang Zhen said, "The Xie family is powerful, and they are under orders to exterminate the demon clan. What can we do? Why don't we accept this pill? At least we won't return empty-handed this time." Feng Ming nodded his head. However, a trace of disappointment flashed unavoidably in his eyes. Elder Sun had sent him a letter to inform him of the matter regarding the Yao Jiao. He knew that there was a hidden intention to test him. If he were to retreat just like that, he would be looked down upon by Elder Sun. However, although he was unwilling to do so, he was alone and unable to do anything. At this time, the cultivator looked behind him, pointed, and said, "Is that senior marshal brother traveling with you?" Fang Zhen turned around and saw that it was Zhang Yan flying towards them. His eyes flashed, and he said, "This person is not easy to deal with. His name is Zhang Yan, and he is a true disciple of the sect. He is usually very domineering, so you must be careful." True disciple. The cultivator was startled. His expression became a bit more cautious, and he took the initiative to greet him. Fang Zhen looked back, hoping that Zhang Yan would make some noise. It would be best if he could fight with him. With this person taking the lead, Fang Zhen would be able to fish in troubled waters. However, he was disappointed. The cultivator respectfully offered a bottle of jade dust pills, and Zhang Yan smiled as he accepted it. He didn't seem to have any intention of fighting over the demonic flood dragon. However, Zhang Yan laughed in his heart. The jade dust pill was a secret technique of the Xie clan, and the Dan Ding courtyard didn't have it. He didn't come here for the demonic flood dragon, and seeing that the other party was afraid that he would be angry, he carefully explained it again and again. Since that was the case, Zhang Yan was happy to accept it. He secretly thought that Xie Zongyuan could have ignored them since he had taken over this place. However, this person's way of doing things was a bit different from the other disciples of the other families. Even though he took the demonic flood dragon for himself, he still shared some benefits with the others, so no one would feel too disgusted. He looked around and saw that there were hundreds of disciples of the Yutsang sect at the bottom of Little Wave Mountain. It seemed that they had all rushed over after hearing about the demonic flood dragon. At this time, a group of people came down from the mountain path in front of them. A young cultivator with a crown on his head walked at the very front. He was surrounded by 4 cultivators of the second level of the mystic light realm, and there were hundreds of strong men behind him. In the middle of the group, there were more than 10 strong men carrying a golden, 4-clawed demonic flood dragon that was around 5 feet long. It had no horns on its head, and it had a fierce appearance. However, there were cloud sun golden chains wrapped around its body, locking the true essence in its body. It looked a bit dispirited and listless. The Yutsang Mountain was one of the top 10 spirit caves in the world, and it was filled with spirit qi. Thus, demonic beasts often came here to take human form. However, this was also very risky. For example, this demonic flood dragon had failed to take human form and barely managed to keep its life. Now that it had been captured, it would become a slave for others in the future. When Fang Zhen saw this demonic flood dragon, he cried out involuntarily, "It's actually a golden flood dragon, an ancient species." When the young cultivator heard this, he raised his head and saw that it was Fang Zhen. He smiled and said, "So it's senior brother Fang. I heard that you became a disciple of Taoist Yen of the Glimmering Light Grotto a month ago. How come you have the time to come out now?" Fang Zhen curled his lips and said sarcastically, "I heard that there's a demonic flood dragon that hasn't taken human form yet. I wanted to come here to kill it and add another merit to my merit book. However, I'm not as fast as you, senior brother Xie Zongyuan." Xie Zongyuan burst into laughter. He cupped his hands in all directions and said, "Senior brothers, I'm ashamed to be one step ahead of you. I only have a few medicinal pills in my haste. I've neglected you all. When I return to the sect, there will be other generous gifts for you." At this moment, no one noticed that on the east side of the small wave, a black light suddenly broke through the water and rushed straight towards the sky. Zhang Yan suddenly heard Luo Zhao's shout from his sleeve, "Master, quickly dodge." Zhang Yan reacted quickly and jumped off the flying boat. Fortunately, he dodged quickly. The black light swept over his head and knocked down the flying boat next to him. The cultivator inside didn't even have time to scream before he was smashed into a rain of blood. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.